This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
It's 3 minutes after 10. A very good morning indeed to you. I don't do this very often, but I don't think it would be quite fair to say that I've never done it before. But I noticed this morning that my thoughts had been piqued. Is that the right use of the word? I think it is. Piqued with a Q. By some of the messages you've been sending me on social media. Well, Blue Sky, really, which is now the only one I use for work purposes. And it was really from a lot of people in Scotland or of Scottish heritage, addressing a question that has popped up a couple of times during the course of this week's contemplation of Keir Starmer's hideous language with regard to his migration white paper. And it was, I mean, there's a curious mixture of the cross Scottish people telling me to remember to distinguish between Scotland and the rest of the UK when it comes to conversations about public opinion or public feeling regarding immigration, and then a slightly warmer mode of communication, people simply addressing my confusion, or curiosity is the right word, addressing my curiosity about two things: whether things are really that different in Scotland, and if so, why. 5 minutes after 10 is the time. And the United Kingdom, of course, is the same place. So Rob's been in touch to talk about small boats landing in Kent and elsewhere, but that doesn't explain why someone in Manchester might be more concerned about it than someone in Edinburgh. You get to the border between England and Scotland and you think that simply by crossing it you are no longer spending your entire life, as I think Rob in North Wales is, animated by small boats. And in fact, mate, the Welsh are much closer to the English on these sort of matters. So why would the Scottish be different? It's a strange one, right? And I want you to tell me. I could tell you that, I mean, it seems vaguely relevant to the question I'm asking. Which place in the UK do you think is currently the most popular for Americans seeking to relocate? So inquiries from people in the US about buying a home in Britain are at an 8-year high. Can anyone think why this might be? Anyone think why sort of Americans might want to be moving out of the United States at the moment? I mean, some people are moving in, including some refugees, which I keep meaning to tell you a little bit more about, but I keep forgetting. I won't forget today. An incredible story about one of the refugees that Donald Trump's administration has recently welcomed indeed, into the United States. So stand by for that. But Edinburgh. The figures showing that applications for UK citizenship are at record levels. Figures showing that inquiries from people in the US about buying a home in Britain are at an 8-year high. And now figures showing that the locale that is most popular for Americans thinking of relocating is Edinburgh. It may be because property prices there compared to London are a lot easier to swallow, but it may not. It may be for different reasons. So if you consider how immigration is such a weather vane for the relationship between politics and public discourse, it breaks my heart, actually, because I find it so dispiriting to watch how easy it is to turn up the heat. You know, there comes a point, doesn't there, in a 20-year career where you have to realise that winning is not necessarily the end game. You just got to keep fighting. So if you despair, if your heart breaks at the sound and the sight of people who have been successfully persuaded that the problems in their life have been caused by immigration, while the people actually responsible for stopping social mobility, Victorian-style distribution of wealth, absolute hypocrisy when it comes to things like cancel culture or wokeness. They can't wait to call for some people to be sacked while spending their entire lives claiming that everybody should have complete freedom of speech. So just the way that our population, through a combination of incredibly right-wing media, secretly funded lobby groups masquerading as think tanks, narcissistic politicians, demagogues, the way that the population has had its brains boiled over the last few years is, on one level, fascinating. On another level, heartbreaking, because it means we end up giving a free pass to the people who are really responsible for many of our problems while going after the ones who aren't, like rats up drain pipes. But there's no immediate reason why that should apply more in England and Wales and Northern Ireland than it does in Scotland. What is it about Scotland in 2025 that makes it a place where the immigration conversation is not as toxic as it is in the rest of these islands, and attitudes to immigration? Wasn't it there that they tried to arrest an asylum seeker and the whole community came out to stop the van from... So I'm pretty sure that was in Scotland. I'm sure that could happen in England, but it seems less likely. And what I mean by the ease with which the heat can be turned up is some of the graphs that, again, I often make the mistake of thinking everybody knows about this. It's so obvious I don't need to explain it, but it really isn't, and I do. When you see the graphs of what happens to public opinion regarding immigration and set it against how much attention the newspapers are paying to immigration, it's absolutely incredible. In the run-up to Brexit, the Daily Mail's front page focused on immigration pretty much every day for a couple of months. That's not an opinion, it's counting. And as a consequence of that, people really, really cared. And then as soon as the referendum was over the line, everyone went quiet for a while and everybody stopped caring. And then Farage turns up in Kent with his Fisher-Price binoculars, raving about the small boats, which of course constitute a tiny percentage of all immigration, but somehow speak to emotions in a way that other forms of migration into this country do not. And it starts getting ramped up again. And then the newspapers... And do you know why they do it? It's not even sinister in a way that I used to think it was. It's just good for business. And one of the big discoveries I've made in the years of doing this job is that it's just good for business. Oh, we've got to stop the boats. We've got to stop immigration. People have had enough. It doesn't necessarily deliver the biggest shows in British speech radio, but it certainly delivers some heft. And there is no real narrative in British newspapers that swims in the opposite direction. It's just really good for business. And I've known that for years, because one of the first clever things I ever said to you, if you'd allow me that moment of conceit, one of the first clever things I ever said to you, and I think it was my own thought for once, rather than one I nicked from your text and then pretended I'd come up with myself, was the line about the ghost train and the Speak Your Weight machine. We turned that off for a few years and it's come back with a vengeance lately. The queue for the ghost train will always be 10 times longer than the queue for the Speak Your Weight machine. The holy grail for me of popular media is to make the Speak Your Weight machine as popular as the ghost train, but I don't think anybody can really. See, even if you are trying to focus more on facts than feelings, you're going to spend quite a lot of time taking the mickey out of the people in the queue for the ghost train in order to delight your friends in the queue for the Speak Your Weight machine. So even then, you're a beneficiary of the length of the queue for the ghost train, even as you deride the fact that the queue is much longer than the queue for the Speak Your Weight machine. But that should also apply in Scotland. Right? That should be the story. It should be the story of our islands, not just the story of bits of it. So if you've got towns that have particularly high migration figures, as we saw during the referendum, places like Boston in Lincolnshire, very high Eastern European population, very high objection to immigration. So, you know, whether or not you've got any proof that it's made your life worse, if you don't like your life and there's somebody over there offering to be a scapegoat, you're going to take them up on the offer. But that doesn't explain why somebody in a part of England that doesn't have the same demographics that a town like Boston has would get more upset than someone in Scotland. Unless Scottish people really, and of course we know that they don't because they lost the referendum. They lost their own, the independent supporters lost their referendum, which means that it's not a country where the massive majority feels so cut off ideologically and philosophically from England that they don't think that problems happening in an English town have anything to do with them. And it's not just me that thinks about this. I found an article. I did some research this morning. Now, that is a phrase you rarely hear me say. And I found a fascinating piece for the Royal Society of Edinburgh from last year, which said attitudes and narratives on immigration. Is Scotland really different? It is often observed that Scotland is an outlier in the UK in terms of the politics of migration. It is the case that the main political parties have embraced the case for increasing migration to Scotland due to ongoing concerns about a declining population and labour market shortages. But again, those concerns would not necessarily be confined to the parts of the United Kingdom that aren't Scotland. You would expect those concerns to extend into the whole country. Concerns about a declining population and labour market shortages. We know about those. And the figures are not massively different when it comes to economic inactivity. So you can't use... I mean, it is just interesting and... What's the word I want? Puzzling. It's puzzling. So what do you think? The other thing you are more than welcome to do, of course, is to blow a hole in my whole hour this morning. I mean, don't blow a massive hole in it really early doors, because it'd be quite nice to have a bit of a chitter-chatter until 11 o'clock on this subject. And it's a nice opportunity for me to pay lip service to that New Year's resolution of a few years ago when I promised to start paying more attention to matters beyond London, at least, and England even. And so here we are, looking at something that is relevant to the entire country, of course, and also particularly relevant to one part of these islands. But feel free to poo-poo it. Feel free to tell me that this is not actually the case, that we get a rose-tinted view of these attitudes from the south of the Scottish-English border, and that in fact things up there are very similar to how they are here. It doesn't look that way to me. And, whether it's Frankie Boyle or whether it's Nicola Sturgeon, two, I think we can all agree, quite different characters, offering up explanations as to why why Scotland would be so different on this issue from the rest of the UK. Karen wants to know whether the newspapers are different up there. In my experience, they are a bit, but we want to hear from people in daily receipt of them. Why do you think Scotland has currently, because I wouldn't necessarily guarantee that this would be the case forever, why do you think Scotland currently has a much more positive attitude towards inward migration than the rest of the United Kingdom? With a little parenthesized caveat that maybe you think it hasn't, close brackets. All right, hit the numbers now, you will get through. 0345 6060 973. Oh, hang on. I want to make something absolutely crystal clear. This is not just for Scottish people or people in Scotland to talk about. I've got theories as well. And you might have theories too. So wherever you are in the world, as you look at the question of why Scotland appears to have a warmer relationship with the very concept of immigration at a time when the rest of the United Kingdom is once again, because we learned nothing from the last time, once again being primed to get ever more furious and upset and frightened about it. Why does Scotland seem to have a form of immunity? And anyone can answer that question. All you've got to do is be thoughtful. Another way in which we fly in the face of traditional phone-in radio. It's 16 minutes after 10 and the number you need is 0345 6060 973.
James O'Brien on LBC.
And of course, I probably should have done this a little bit sooner to spare your blushes. But if you're minded to suggest that Scotland doesn't have the same attitude to immigration because they haven't got as many immigrants, or they do this, that and the other, and small boats, London. How does London fit into your genius analysis? We may do that on another day, actually. Why does London have... Because I think the answer's fairly obvious in the case of London, is that the more experience you have of something, the more comfortable you become with it. It was the speed of change in places like Boston that perhaps scared the horses, but... Scotland seems, by most accounts, to be a place where the narratives and attitudes regarding immigration are very different from those in England. Why? Jim is in, appropriately enough, the number one destination for Americans seeking a home in the UK, the beautiful city of Edinburgh. Jim, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James.
Hello.
I'm a musician from Edinburgh. And I think that two things I'd like to bring your attention to, Jim.
Yes.
One, James, sorry, is remember we voted 65% to remain in Brexit.
Yes.
We did not take that. The other thing is we have never voted for Conservative government and all the time that I've been alive, and I'm 80.
But these are good grief. These are symptoms of what we're talking about, not causes.
I know that I'm going to say something which is controversial. We Scots are much more communitarian-minded than England. There is a difference, James, and I know that people are going to say, "Oh, that's rubbish," but it's true.
There's a song there, isn't there? That's rubbish, but it's true. It's
okay,
not.
I'll put it to music.
I think you should. I think you talk to me. It's not a brilliant brilliant phone line. So I'll stay quiet while you tell me what communitarian means.
Well, what I'm saying is we believe much more, I think, in Scotland and things like we're looking after each other, I think. And it's not a condemnation of England. It's just the fact that that's where we are. We're not so property-orientated as you are in England. We're not so privatising, like, i.e., so Thames Water would never have existed in Scotland with Scottish psyche. No, it's a fact now. You're going to have to accept this. And
no, I do. I'm just thinking I hadn't thought of that. I didn't, and that works. Yeah.
Nigel Farage would never have taken it up in Scotland. Reform Party would have been ridiculed. We did. Nigel Farage came to the pub round about where I was playing, and he was in there. And of course, the place was surrounded. It's not okay. I'm not going to say it's a good idea, but that street was filling up, and he had to be taken out. Now,
that speaks of a small number of protesters, and of course, everyone would urge them to be peaceful in all contexts. But
Absolutely.
this doesn't. Why would you not be? Because you can be all of these things, but still tribal. You can be all of the things you've described, but still easily spooked, as it were.
Sure, James, but you got to remember tradition as well. It's important. Tradition is important in Scotland. You talk about Highland hospitality and stuff like that. It's true that people look at each other. And another thing is, James, is
Yorkshire
like
tea.
Edinburgh.
Yes, go on.
Sorry, go on.
You can talk about Yorkshire tea. I can find parts of England that have reputations for... Don't laugh. It's Highland hospitality and Yorkshire tea. I can't see your Highland hospitality. I'll raise you Yorkshire tea.
Okay, you go for that. I'm just saying that this is a fact.
Yeah.
Now, the other thing is, in Edinburgh, for instance, we've had the festival for a while. Now, you brought in Brexit and stuff, and we didn't want Brexit. You took out the Erasmus movement, that which was helping so much. We have the festival. We have people coming in from everywhere around the world. We get 1 million people a year.
Yeah, but I love all of your answers, but none of them are Scottish specific. And the point about Brexit is actually a symptom, not a cause, of the condition that we're examining. And so the higher the levels, your final argument, the more accepting we'll be is blatantly disproved by the experience south of the border. I don't know. Maybe there's nothing. Maybe there's more. Maybe there's less. But that's a perfect start, Jim. I thank you. Trevor is in Diss in Norfolk. Trevor, what do you think from the perspective of sunny Diss?
Yeah, not so sunny at the moment. But yeah. Yeah, I will start by saying I've very rarely even been to Scotland, just over the border a couple of times,
Well, that's a great start. Then, in that case, what better qualifications could you possibly have?
I mean, your previous caller's got an awful lot there. I think it's an emotional thing.
Go on.
Scotland, the Scottish are comfortable in their own skin. They know they're Scottish. They know what it is to be Scottish.
Yes.
And that sort of covers all the sort of the racism thing. A guy with a dark face who talks in a Scottish accent, it's fine. He's Scottish. Don't matter. England has lost its identity. England, the specific English identity has got lost in being British for all the centuries of the British Empire.
When did we have it?
I don't know. Well, we probably did. We probably had it back in the Elizabethan period. In the days of the English Empire.
So we're looking at 500 years ago. Things were better.
Yeah. Well, no, I'm not saying that. But it's just
Come
because
on,
we haven't.
All right. Okay. Then you know what I do now, and I do this affectionately. Just put into words what the English identity was.
I don't know. I wasn't around 500 years ago. But
then this is the most ridiculous argument I've heard all morning.
Okay. I don't know.
I've never been to Scotland, and I think that the reason why it's different from England is because of what we were like 500 years ago.
No.
That is exactly what everyone's heard.
Right. Okay. Let's take it back a bit. That's not what I meant at all. I don't think we know really what specifically English means, and for a lot of people that means being white, which is, of course, is awful, because that's not it at all.
Oh, well, now we can get our teeth into that. So you think that there is, so when people like Suella Braverman talk about how they can't be English, she speaks to a sense that doesn't exist in Scotland. So a Scottish politician would never say, of ethnic minority extraction, would never say that they can't be Scottish.
Because,
that's actually a really clever point. Now, that is an extraordinary U-turn that you've undertaken there, Trevor. You've gone from undiluted jibber-jabber into a point of beautiful luminescence.
Well, this is why it's always good to talk to you. It's like, I ought to do it more frequently than once every 8 years. Last time I spoke to you was the day after Donald Trump got elected, and I was trying to cheer you up.
The first time. Well, you've done it again. You've done it again. You've cheered me up again. Maybe that is part of it. Certainly in terms of ethnic minority immigration as opposed to European immigration, maybe that idea of being Scottish is a little bit more encompassing than some people's idea of being English. And Suella Braverman has provided us with the perfect example, because she's English, but she doesn't think she is, and she doesn't think anybody should allow her to claim that she is, because she's brown-skinned and her family haven't been here for enough generations. That is a really interesting thought. But, of course, Trevor is not qualified to comment on whether or not that is actually how Scottish people feel, because he's hardly ever been there. Michael is in. Oh, do me a favour. No, you're not.
Fort Augustus?
Well, I'll take Fort Augustus. They put Loch Ness on the screen. That would be like ticking boxes galore under one single moment. Anyway, what do you want to say, Michael?
Well, I'm an American. I'm pretending I'm Canadian while I'm traveling because I'm so embarrassed to be an American right now.
We had that we did a bus tour in Dublin last month, and there were a couple of guys from Pennsylvania behind us who did exactly the same thing. Are there any Americans on the bus? No. Any Canadians? Yeah. Where are you from? Oh, all right, Pennsylvania. Go on, carry on.
So the thing that I think about is, as I'm traveling through Scotland, my husband and I are definitely part of the group that are looking to leave the U.S. And Scotland definitely has a different approach to people who are different. I think because I've been here many times, and part of what I see is Scotland views itself as colonized. The English, the English and Scottish, from my perspective, are still working out, their 300-year forced marriage. And there's an approach here that is about inclusivity. I mean, individual people in England that I meet are very kind, just like most Americans I know are very inclusive of immigrants. But the culture in the U.S. and England, I think, is far more about who has the right to claim themselves as English. It's like who has the right to claim themselves as American.
Yeah, this ties in a little bit with what Trevor was saying. You're describing, I think, almost institutional inclusivity as opposed to individual.
Right, but part of it here is it's also cheaper to live here.
Yes.
And part of it, there's also, I'm staring out at the Loch Ness right now, and there's immense natural beauty, and England has some natural beauty, but not like this.
I'd see Loch Ness and I'll raise you Lake Windermere.
Yeah.
But I don't want to get it. I mean, now I'm getting culturally nationalist. So there's a lot here, but it speaks to just a similar theme of people being less easily angered about things that really none of us should be getting angry about.
Well, and in the States, right now, everybody's angry.
Yeah,
and it's really incredibly frightening as an American to realize, one, I have to go back next week, and two, I have to whenever I'm in a place like Scotland, or I was in the north of Ireland last year, and there's this approach that people realize that in our Western capitalist system, you need a lot of people from different lands to do the work, like NHS employees and so many other work.
Well, then actually no one's mentioned the media yet, because the fact that some of these arguments should be self-evident and yet aren't, depending on what part of the United Kingdom you're sitting in, probably, or what part of America even, probably does have something to do with the messaging that you're receiving and the way that the media frames public discourse. But you'd have thought with the rise of social media that everybody was going to be drinking from the same well, wouldn't you?
But I think the opposite is true. We now each have our own different wells, and I was perusing the local papers, and there's this paper here called The Independent, which is it says on the headline we're all about Scottish independence.
Yes.
And I think independence.
Not the National.
I'm sorry.
Is it not called the National?
Oh, maybe it is. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay.
The press here is so different because as you say often, the right wing media here is very, very strong. I mean, we have right wing media in the U.S., but it's largely Murdoch press.
Yes,
and here there seems to be so many more voices that are telling people, instilling in people this idea that other is frightening. I don't get that
because it is good for business. It's barely even ideological. Thank you. You've maybe I'm just taking me all the way up to the news, Michael. I hope you enjoy the rest of your stay, and I hope that the welcome you're receiving continues to be so warm. But that's why the Fox News attempts have never taken off in this country. Because we beat them to it by decades with organisations and organs like the Daily Mail and the Sun. The idea that you could somehow become commercially amazing by being rabidly right wing. It took off in America because there was a vacuum where Fox News moved. But here they'd just be eating the Daily Mail's lunch by doing rabid right wing broadcasting. It is 10:31. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Amelia Cox is here now with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
34. The latest research shows us that 38% of the Scottish public would like immigration to increase rather than decrease, which stands at 28%. What is interesting, and it speaks perhaps to the emotional nature of this conversation, is that while most of the people in favour of an increase would mainly support a modest increase, those who want immigration to decrease want it to be reduced by, quotes, a lot. It's an interesting one, isn't it? And it doesn't reflect attitudes in England. That's something that needs to be pointed out, even though Ian in Salford is very unhappy about it. He puts, people are annoyed at the level of immigration, both legal and illegal. Why are you so obsessed with painting English people as racist? I haven't even said the word today, Ian. All I've done is wonder what it is about people in Scotland and that are relaxed about immigration that makes them different from people in England who, I mean, by your own description, are annoyed about both legal and illegal immigration. So what might that difference be? I've got a horrible feeling you've answered your own question and then got cross with me for holding up a mirror. That's a bit unkind. Anyway, as Grant says, it isn't just, it isn't legal, it's just illegal. I disagree with this as well, for the record. From Grant, currently living in Germany as a legal migrant, I can assure you that Scotland is no different from other parts of the UK. Whilst we welcome legal migration and those who wish to contribute to society, we are no different to England by turning against mass illegal immigration. Again, it's not quite supported by the figures, and of course one of the great canards of this conversation over the last 20 years is that people who are coming here via irregular routes will also be largely desperate to contribute to British society. I think that haven't they just appointed a former refugee? I must dig that story out actually, but it is a prevention by law from contributing to British society that distinguishes a regular migrant from an irregular migrant. I don't like using illegal because it's become a noun. I'm happy to use it as an adjective, an illegal migrant, but when people started using it as a noun, it seemed to me to be really quite vile in the way that it deliberately dehumanised people, calling someone an illegal. And of course, during the Farage riots, it was a word that was absolutely everywhere on social media as a noun. And we saw where that led. Mary is in. I'll just run through my switchboard quickly before we talk to Mary in Aberdeen. At the moment, it goes Glasgow, Aberdeen, Edinburgh, Stirling, Edinburgh, Croydon, Elephant and Castle, Edinburgh. So perhaps time for another little reminder that you can approach this question from the outside of Scotland, not just the inside. In fact, that's what I do. And because I'm boring and predictable, I think it's probably got a lot more to do with the media than many outsiders might realise. Mary is in Aberdeen. Mary, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James.
Hello, Mary.
I think partly it's because as Scots, we are used to being the others. If you look on social media, we are told that the reason we have things like prescriptions through taxation is because we are subsidised. We are the people who are pointed at and told basically that things would be better for England if they didn't give us so much money. So we are the others to blame for the decisions that are taken politically. You go back to the Thatcher era and I'm all right, Jack. We never really bought into that. We were othered through the poll tax. We were the guinea pigs. So I think that there's that. I think we're also fairly pragmatic. If you want to be looked after through social care or health, largely there will be people from other nations who've come and settled here, and we are happy for them to be here. We have the phrase in Scotland, we're all Jock Tamson's parents,
yes.
No matter where you come from.
What does that mean?
Tell
us what that means. A lot of people have sent me that today.
It's a belief that we all come from the same beginnings, as it were. Everyone starts out the same. I'm no different from someone who lives and works. I was a teacher in Scotland. I'm no different from the teacher who is in Africa or India. I'm no different from anyone else. We're all part of humanity.
So patriotism without exceptionalism?
Oh, yes. You come to Scotland, you want to work here, you want to live here, you want to make a life here, you want to contribute. Welcome. Many of us are very pragmatic. I'm not saying we don't have people here who don't
No,
want
of course. I mean, we're never going to generalise hugely about any demographic or any population, but in percentage terms, when you say we, you're speaking for the demographic difference, the fact that people want more immigration or than want to decrease it in Scotland, which is not the case in England.
Yes, I think so. And I think as well, you mentioned, you referenced before you spoke to me, the impact of media.
Yes.
And we sort of shrug up here, but quite often, and people do it, they refer to England instead of Britain. So you feel that you've been, we don't count. It's that othering, if you like, in a different way that makes you think, well, they don't care about us, really. We're insignificant.
Right, yeah,
we don't matter,
really,
so we're used to that.
This would be much clearer to a Scot than it would to an Englishman, wouldn't it? Because we probably wouldn't notice it as much, and it certainly wouldn't register as strongly as it would if you were in the othered part of the population.
I think that's part of it. It's a sense of, well, we'll all stick together and we will do the best we can. And I think the fact that, as I say, people don't look at what comes from Scotland to the south, of what we contribute and what we give. When you look on social media, it's about we're seen as takers. So we are the others that people can point to and say, if it wasn't for them, we would have.
That's such a, yes. And is there a Burns line about a man's a man?
Yeah.
What is it?
A man's a man for all that.
There it is. And that fits with the Jock Tamson sort of attitude as well.
Absolutely.
And they will be. Look, there'll be bigotry in Scotland. There'll be prejudice. There'll be legitimate concerns about demographic change and all the rest of it. But it's certainly worth tracking why there is also a fairly big difference in attitudes on this most hot of hot potatoes. Mary, thank you. That was lovely. 10:41 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I think tying together the callers today, I'm going to marry Trevor in Diss to Mary in Aberdeen, because trying to determine English identity is pretty much impossible. You will just end up talking about cricket and tea, which is fine. Talking about Scottish identity, you might just end up talking about Iron Brew and Robbie Burns. These are relatively silly concepts precisely because there is no such thing as a unique national characteristic. You can talk about kindness, you can talk about good manners, but that you can't say that we've got them here, but they don't have them. You see what I mean? And yet we all do it and we can't help it. But if you've got exceptionalism, that weird feeling I used to have as a schoolboy when I saw the map coloured for empire and saw the red of England or Britain stretching all across the globe and feeling some sort of personal pride in it, which is obviously ridiculous, but true and authentic in terms of my feelings. And of course, a huge part of our imperial success was driven by Scots, was driven by Scotland, both commercially and geographically. But that notion of English exceptionalism, that we really are better than other people. Was it Churchill who said you've won the lottery of life to be born an Englishman? And, if you believe that on a nice, gentle cream teas and cricket level, or church bells and whatever. But if you start believing it on a human-to-human level, it turns you into something quite unpleasant. potentially, or it at least creates an unpleasant thought inside you. If you marry Trevor's contribution from the English perspective to Mary's perspective from Scotland, you do wonder whether the Scottish warmth or warmer attitudes to this issue is actually born of a pride that doesn't involve exceptionalism, being delighted in who you are without being disgusted by who other people are, or at least denigratory, if that's a word, of other people. Does that make sense? I think it does. Joanna is in Stirling. Joanna, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
I really do apologise. I thought I used up my quota on Monday.
No,
but
I could listen to your accent all day, Joanna. I seriously, you know I could. And also, who could be better qualified to talk about this issue than our favourite Polish Scot?
Thank you. No, I just when I heard you talking about this, I thought I have to ring in and I have to speak from my perspective. I've been here for 16 years now, and from the very beginning I came here, I did speak English. That maybe made it a bit easier for me. So when I came in the first time, maybe I didn't have the Scottish accent yet then, but I could speak English. And I was felt very welcome, and people were very interested in who I was, and they were interested in my Polishness as well. So I never felt I had to hide behind, kind of my good English and pretending I'm from somewhere,
Yeah, no, I do.
And
we don't know for sure that wouldn't have happened in England, do we?
Well, I kind of can say that because as a student, I worked for a few summers in the south of England, Gloucestershire to be exact. And I travelled through England quite a lot on my holidays because I love England. I think it's there's so many beautiful places there.
True.
There's still lots of places I want to go to. I spent a lot of time in Peak District and in the Lake District, and so I'm around Manchester area, and
so you can make comparisons of sorts.
Of sorts, yes. I think English people always have felt a little bit of reserve. They were friendly, they were very nice, they were very polite, but there was always that little bit further distance that I could feel between myself and them than I feel in Scotland. In Scotland, it was more like, just come on in, just make yourself at home.
Why do we think that is, though? Because, you describe symptoms, not causes, and they're very happy symptoms.
Yeah,
but what do we know? I mean, do we have a view on or a thought on why that might be?
I think there were a few things mentioned today. I mean, maybe the history that Scottish people, because they were always a kind of like a small nation in a quite hard land, they kind of created that own identity, and they were always had to kind of make themselves feel Scottish, almost in opposition to everything else that was happening further south.
No, I think that's historically pretty sound, I think, and also that the sense of exploitation and oppression from the south has created a character that perhaps is not present among English people.
There is one thing that I always give an example of when people ask me about Scotland and England, and that's really quite close to my heart because I love walking. Is the right to roam? Is that freedom you have. You don't have the set path you have to take. You can go and you can wild camp wherever you want as long as you observe certain rules. So leave no trace, basically. So you can go anywhere. Just be mindful that there is a farmer. He's got his field. So don't stand on whatever crop there is. Don't keep your dog always on the lead if there is any farm animals, and kind of just make sure that you're behaving in a correct way. If you feel you've got more of a stake, if you've got more of a stake in your land, your country, then perhaps you're less susceptible to people whispering into your ears that people are going to take what it is that you've got. If you're happy with your lot, and I don't mean economically, I mean philosophically or emotionally, as Joanna describes it. Freedom, walking, this is my land. And then you become less susceptible to the poison being poured into your ear telling you that someone's trying to steal the little that you have. You don't feel much of
stake anyway, you're more susceptible. I don't know. Or maybe you're less. Maybe it's the other way around. The more stake you think you've got, the more susceptible you should be to somebody telling you that that fella over there is going to take it away. Freedom. I don't think I was the only one who thought of a certain cinematic reference at that point. Joanna, it's always lovely to talk to you. It really is. We should get the theme tune ready. We should give Joanna her own theme tune. Give Me Hope. We should get that up, shouldn't we? It's 10:47.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 10 to 11. So why does the kind of rhetoric that Les in Thanet has fallen for land much harder in Kent than it does in Scotland? There's a couple of cases he refers to as still live, so I shall choose my words carefully, but he reckons that the reason why we have the ATI doesn't really address the question of why things would be different in Scotland, but the fact that the man that killed the 3 young girls in Southport was the son of migrants, he thinks is very relevant to the conversation that we're having. So here is a criminal, not actually an immigrant, but the child of immigrants, who's committed a hideous crime, and that is why I don't like immigration. And why would that land in Les's little head in Thanet harder than it would somewhere else? Because, I mean, to sit here and say there's a Capricorn over there who's committed a crime, therefore I hate all Capricorns, would be just as stupid as Les's point. Or, I don't like people with French surnames. And I think they're the reason why everything in this country is awful. Because one person with a French surname is a proven a joke. It's just such lazy. And the whole point about the Farage riots was that people believed that they should attack everybody of a certain what? Demographic, culture, origin, religion, status, because they had been lied to about crimes being committed by somebody of, quotes, the same, end quotes, demographic, culture, religion, status. Incredible, really, how people like Les can move from, on that single issue, that the Southport killings, which prompted hideous violence up and down the country based entirely on lies about immigration. And now he thinks he can use it as an example of why immigration is bad, despite the fact, of course, that the person who did it isn't even an immigrant. That's the rhetoric. And you can tell from my voice, I say this with concern for people like Les, not with undiluted disgust. Something has been done to these people. Why does it work better in Thanet, for example, than it does in Scotland? 10:52 is the time. Rory is in Edinburgh. Rory, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James. First time, long time.
Welcome.
I'm really glad you brought up that legacy of empire about just before the break there, because I think actually that's probably where I think that the differences between Scotland and England and immigration come from. Do you know of the Highland clearances by any chance?
Yes, of course I do.
So I think that really that's where we come from. You know, this time of real oppression.
So just for people who don't know, landowners, largely English, realise that they can make more money from having sheep on their land than from having people subsistence farming, effectively. So they just cleared all the people out without a thought really of where they would go. An awful lot got on boats to Canada, an awful lot left Scotland altogether, and many of the people that remained faced poverty that was entirely inflicted from above. Just like, in fact, the thing that is often referred to as the famine in Ireland, which was nothing of the sort. There was shed loads of food. They were just shipping it all back to England. So that is the context that you're deploying here.
Absolutely spot on. And I think bringing up Ireland in that context also makes complete sense, because I feel they have a different cultural attitude towards immigration as well. I certainly think that I was actually over in Dublin last weekend, and honestly, it was like being in a parallel dimension Scotland, in a sense.
Yes, I agree with that. I don't want to oversimplify or generalise, but those are my sentiments as well. That's exactly how I feel as well.
Yeah, it's great that seems to be a thing that emerges as a joint.
So why does this change the attitudes then?
So I think it's exactly as you said, because people moved or were forced to move abroad, because they were. I mean, you could move to Glasgow and Edinburgh, but these places became large slums in a sense, because people were basically forced out their homes, forced to move abroad with nothing but, like pennies in their bags, and even then it wasn't that much. I think that's created a culture of immigration in Scotland. I think it's created this identity, as sort of Mary was alluding to earlier, the previous caller, is that there's this idea fear of the other, and Scottish people exist as that other. I think, in particular, if you look at the demographics, I was just before I came on the call, I was just double checking this. So in 1821 census, Scotland's population was 1/5 of England's. Now it's 1/10. So I think there's a fair argument to be made that there is a sort of the Highland clearances and other issues around that time stemming from similar roots have probably led to a decline in Scotland's population and has damaged the growth of the population, which has allowed this sort of reliance on immigration in our own country to develop in something that we've welcomed rather than pushed away.
Well, there's an irony there, isn't there, in a way? And of course it does distinguish between Scotland and England on historical grounds. So it's a great counter to the claim of, well, hang on a minute, why would that apply in Dundee and not in Doncaster? And you've got your answer there because of generational trauma and historical legacy.
I'm really glad my international relations degree is coming in clutch for one of these things.
That might be the third hour of the programme today, actually, about whether or not a rather brilliant writer who opined this week that many kids who've gone to the trouble of getting degrees have been terribly betrayed. But not in your case, Rory, because you brought your learning to the table. 10:56 is the time. A lot of love for Les in Thanet coming in. James points out that poor fellow hasn't been to the doctor since Harold Shipman was convicted, because obviously Harold Shipman's crimes mean that all doctors are terrible murderers. So that perhaps is something we should have taken into account when considering Les's contribution. A man devoid of any medical assistance whatsoever, because of Harold Shipman being a murderer, you see. Neil is in Croydon. Neil, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
I'm calling in from the perspective from somebody from London, but I've only recently just moved back to London. I was living in Aberdeen in Scotland for 18 years, and the attitudes are no different in Scotland than they are to in England.
Well, the numbers say they are, but I'm glad you're here, because for the avoidance of doubt, there will be plenty of people who hold the opinions that we more readily associate with England in Scotland, and you no doubt encountered them. Yeah,
so as I say, I'm from London, mixed race lad, lived in Aberdeen for 18 years. My 18 years I was in Scotland, I was racially abused twice. One of the reasons I'm now back in London. You just have to go on the social media and see the comments that go up when there's something. They don't even have to see who the race of the person, they just have to see the name. Get them back on the boats. It's all there. It's all there in Scotland. Where the difference is that the government stance on immigration is different. So that's what we get pumped out here. But the government stance on things to do against England, if it's different to England, the government in Scotland tend to be different. And one of your other callers picked up on that a little while ago.
Well, you've got 38% of the Scottish public would like immigration to increase, and 28% would like it to decrease. So that's a measurable difference, not just between pro and anti-immigration Scots, but also between Scots and English people. But I mean, not for a nanosecond is anyone suggesting that racism doesn't exist in Scotland or that anti-immigrant sentiment doesn't exist. The question really is about why this measured difference exists.
But what's the difference in England then on the same polls?
That's why I think London's really interesting.
Which I bet it's not that anti-immigrant at all, is it? In London?
Exactly, and yet it has by far the highest rates in the country, and so by all that,
I bet if you did the same thing on Glasgow specifically or Edinburgh, it would be different.
Maybe they have. We'll look into it. But I'm glad we squeezed you in at the end to avoid any sort of rose-tinted analysis that we're painting Scotland as a wonderful country where everybody is treated as an equal, racism doesn't exist, and immigrants are just as welcome to break bread at your table as your grandma. But we are interested in where the differences kick in and where the distinctions may have come from. And I think we've done a pretty good job. I think, especially with that final contribution regarding the Highland clearances and the sense of historical grievance, justified grievance. Maybe that's one of the big differences. So Scottish people have a sense of justified historical grievance. Demagogues and snake oil salesmen in this country, in England, they depend entirely upon sowing seeds of grievance among people who historically have been on the winning side or the benefiting side of exploitation. So how do you successfully persuade someone that they're having what is taken away from them, something that is rightfully theirs is being taken away from them? Much easier to do with people in England than with people in Scotland who really have had something that was rightfully theirs taken away. They know what the real thing looks like, which makes them less susceptible to the lies of the far right. Maybe.
James O'Brien on LBC.
3 minutes after 11 is the time. I'm in a bit of a moment here. I have a theory. I've got a new theory, and I felt that today's report that children are going to be taught to show some grit would provide further proof of my theory. But I'm struggling to find the word grit anywhere except in the Daily Telegraph's headline. And the more I look at what Bridget Phillipson and Wes Streeting have actually said, the more... No, there it is. No, we're okay. Thank goodness for that. So I like the thrust of the policy pronouncement. But the way that they're selling it seems to me to be part of what has emerged in my mind this week as, I use the word very loosely, but a facet of Starmerism. There is and we're back to the thing about queues that I've been boring you rigid with all week. It's first explained to me, I forget who it was, someone really clever, when they were analysing Donald Trump's success the first time round. The last time our friend in Dish gave me a ring on the programme 8 years ago. So the idea that people who've been standing in a queue can be very easily persuaded that somebody else has pushed in front of them. And this is such a powerful psychological tool for two reasons. Number one, there is the immediate sense of injustice and unfairness. I don't know whether countries that are more prone to queuing are more prone to feeling that sense of injustice and unfairness when queues are jumped, or at least when you are told that queues are jumped, whether they have been or not. You're susceptible to it. And the more people you can see who don't look like you, the easier it is to persuade people that they have been pushed in front of in the queue. The second element of it, which hadn't really occurred to me before this week, is that it makes you feel stupid for queuing. And I don't know that we hate anything more than being made to feel stupid ourselves and being made to feel that our own behaviour has been naive or reckless or wrong. So you turn on yourself almost. And when you are cross with yourself, what do? You lash out. You look for a scapegoat. We all do this, I think, or at least those of us who haven't achieved nirvana or whatever it is, enlightenment, as the Buddhists call it, or peak therapy, as I suppose the Western equivalent would be. We are all driven by trauma and shame and guilt in many ways. And if someone has made you feel stupid for doing what you thought was the right thing, you're not going to blame the person. This is the bit I don't get. You're not going to blame the person who told you to queue up. You're not going to blame yourself for queuing up. You're going to blame the person you've been told has pushed in front of you. And I think this week on immigration, and now by putting the word grit in the middle of otherwise really rather beautiful policy promises, this government is speaking to people in the queue. And they're almost now, for good or for ill, they're almost now abandoning everybody else, everybody perceived as being queued jumpers, people who are not part of whatever this homogenous group of Britishness contains. And of course, it's amorphous. Everybody's idea of Britishness, as we often establish on the programme, is going to be different. But you're appealing to a sense of... Someone sent me a brilliant text, which I've lost, about why normal is a thing. Our friend in Thanet, furious with immigration in general because of the actions of a tiny number of immigrants, just as he can't go to the doctors anymore because of Harold flipping Shipman. But the idea that they're not normal. I am normal. I am in the queue. And this person here is not like me. So most obviously that works in immigration. But I think generationally it works with children as well. When you hear older people, usually but not always men, decrying the mental health crisis our younger generation faces, and almost blaming, well, not even almost, pretty much blaming them for it, either implicitly or explicitly, suggesting people need to pull their socks up more, or be more resilient, or be tougher. They're doing something really, really interesting. And I think that this use of the word grit, the way that in some ways the headline is phrased, it's telling people in the queue that we're going to start looking after, well, not that we're going to start looking after you more, but we're going to stop looking after all those people who aren't normal, who aren't like you. So the Labour government, or the Labour Party at least, because of course it hasn't been in power for 14 years, has been successfully portrayed over the course of those 14 years as caring too much about, and now fill in whatever gap you want, caring too much about asylum seekers, caring too much about foreign-born workers, caring too much about gay people, caring too much about transgender people. The Labour Party has been successfully portrayed over the last 14 years as caring too much about someone that's not you. Someone that's not you. You had a difficult childhood and you've turned out all right. You endured trauma when you were young and you didn't give it a fancy name. You got into trouble at school, but they didn't say you had ADHD. You didn't get special treatment. You didn't get looked after. So why should they? Why should this new generation of children get? I think I could be completely wrong. Sometimes you're very kind to me. You let me do my thinking out loud. And if I make terrible mistakes, we can both pretend it never happened. That is such an interesting and powerful engine. And it makes, I'm not excusing anything that is happening at the moment, but I like to explain it. Or rather, I like to understand things. And I can't understand things without finding decent explanations. Why has he done this stuff about Island of Strangers and the, what was the word he used, squalid chapter? It's not quite as ugly as I originally thought. He talks about a squalid chapter in British politics, not caused by immigration, but caused by the discourse around immigration. But you know that can't have been a coincidence that lands so heavily on very right-wing rhetorical scales. Why is he doing that? Because here is the queue of people. Here is the what would you call it? The identikit voter. Here is every man. Here is the woman on the Clapham omnibus. And she feels that people who aren't like her get too much help. This is good, isn't it? This is just, I love it when this happens. It begins to make more sense the longer I go on. People who aren't like you are getting too much help. So who's not like you? Well, we can cut support for the disabled. They get too much help. We can cut support for immigrants, or we can cut numbers. They get too much from our country. Mental health, God, they just need to work harder. We can cut that too. This isn't pretty, does it? That's why, maybe the winter fuel payments are an anomaly to this theory. Or are they? Are they an anomaly? The pensioners get too much. I don't know. That's probably why that one sticks out as different. Of course, right-wing wealthy journalists are also going to get very cross about things like taxes on second homes, or most obviously VAT on school fees. But that's not every man. That's not the identikit voter, is it? The central voter feels that people not like them have been getting too much help, and that's why I think it's a terrible mistake for them to have put grit. Because all you're going to get now is a bunch of people describing difficult experiences they had as children and then claiming it didn't do them any harm. Or it was character forming for me to be beaten by my stepmother. It was character forming for me to be hungry. It was character forming for me to grow up in a slum. It was character forming for me to endure. No, it really wasn't. It was something vicious and unfair, inflicted upon you by circumstances beyond your control. And you're never going to learn to love yourself until you recognize that you didn't deserve to be treated like that and you did nothing wrong. So here's a really interesting thing that a close friend of mine told me a couple of weeks ago. I'm sort of, as you know, I'm a huge fan of therapy, and because I've talked about it a lot, people talk to me about it in my personal life and in my professional life. It's one of those things. It's a bit like infertility, which I also talked and wrote about an awful lot 20 years ago. And as a consequence of that, people still seek me out because so few men do talk about it, and so many men should. So many men need to. But therapy, and he told me something quite extraordinary. And he was having trouble with his son, his 14-year-old son. And he brought it up in therapy. And he loves his boy. He's a brilliant dad to an outsider. But they were having a real locking of horns. I went to school with him. That's how well I know him. And his therapist said something quite incredible. The lad was having some difficulties at school. He'd had a diagnosis of a special educational need. They were looking at an ADHD diagnosis, and he just wasn't being as loving and supportive as he obviously wanted to be. So he mentioned this to his therapist, and his therapist said, I'm just incredible, this. He said, oh, you're jealous. And he said, what? He said, you're jealous of your boy. Because, and remember, we went to the same school. This is important. Because when you were 14, no one was looking after you. When you were 14 and you were dealing with issues and problems with authority and quite possibly ADHD as well, actually, now I come to think of it, no one looked after you. You had to do it all on your own. Oh, yeah, you had teachers, you had a housemaster, a matron, but no one really looked after you like you and your wife are looking after your son. So even as you are searching for every possible way under the sun to help your boy, your inner child is jealous of the help you're giving your own son. Isn't that incredible? Well, I think it is anyway. If you don't, Yabu sucks. I just think that's... And the point was, reason he was telling me about it was because he kind of had a full-on road to Damascus moment. He said, and he knows that I have similar views about school, so he couldn't wait to share it with me. That's incredible. I think that's incredible. And it's why talking about grit is so unhelpful. Everything else here is really good. They don't doubt the diagnoses. They don't pretend that anybody is lying. They don't attack children. They don't overlook the relevance of anxiety and low mood. The knock-on effects of school absences are a national tragedy, not just a personal tragedy. But when they talk about grit, we will not only halt the spiral towards crisis, brilliant, but cultivated much-needed grit among the next generation. Then you're telling the older generation that we're not going to be pussyfooting around anymore with these youngsters. We're going to be teaching them grit. Stiff upper lip, right? Isn't it? What's the difference between grit and a stiff upper lip? A stiff upper lip is utterly hideous, not just for the person with it, but for anybody around them as well, because they're emotionally illiterate. They're absent emotionally quite often. They're dealing with their own pain by pretending it's not there. I don't know. One of my favourite subjects, this. Not least because I think that the epidemic of mental health issues among young people, 20% of 8 to 16-year-olds had a probable mental health problem in 2023. It's gone up by 7 percentage points since 2017. That's huge. Lockdown is going to be a massive part of it and will be for goodness knows how long to come. But the idea of grit sounds horribly familiar or similar to me to the idea of manning up. Don't you think? What the heck is the phone in at the end of this intro? I just wanted to tell you that story because I thought it was so powerful. But I guess what we need to talk about is why young people today have anxiety and low mood in ways that most of their parents didn't. So that's question number 1, 0345 6060 973. Question number 2, what should we say instead of grit? I mean that. I don't do this very often because it's not deep, is it? It's just a word. But I suppose I should also ask whether you agree with me that the use of the word grit in this context is incredibly unhelpful. Incredibly unhelpful. But the problem I have is I don't know what I'd replace it with. But I'd just say good mental health. So where are we? How do you want to do it? Let's look at the central problem that they're seeking to address. Why are young people today so much more likely to suffer from poor mental health than their parents were? 0345 6060 973. I might sit and wait for you to ring in on this. Why? Knowing what you know, what is it that is different now from when you were young? Okay? And then the second bit of the question is, am I having a bit of a weird one? Or is grit a really unhelpful word in this context? What was it like when you were young and you were struggling? Or now you struggle with anxiety and someone tells you just to toughen up? That's what it sounds like, right? It's not toughening up that you need. It's understanding yourself and being kind to yourself. It's love and care that you need, not grit, not manning up, not toughening up. Is it? Well, I think so anyway, but I'm a huge beneficiary of therapy. Maybe you think I sound like a complete joker. But what is actually going on here? Real problems don't get fixed by rubble, by grit. 0345 6060 973. Why is the problem growing? And is this language unhelpful to the task of improving things? Hit the numbers now, you will get through.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 20 minutes after 11 and you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Apart from the John Wayne film, I can't think of any circumstances in which grit is regarded as a good thing. You get grit in your eye. You get grit in your sandwiches when you're on a picnic. What else can you get grit in? And very rarely do you want to. I think birds need grit, don't they? Don't birds need a little bit of grit in their gizzard in order to break down? I don't know where that bit of information came from. Probably Mystery Hour. So the things that they've announced, Bridget Phillipson and Wes Streeting today, sound good to me. But when they describe themselves as trying to cultivate much-needed grit, what is going on? And why has this problem grown so exponentially? Rob's in Launceston in Cornwall. Rob, what would you like to say?
James, I think the problem nowadays and what people need to acknowledge is the pressure that children are under.
Yeah.
So you've got social media telling them what to wear, what to look like and everything else. You've got untold pressure in school with exams, constantly being tested. It's almost like they're not allowed to be children, almost. Then we look at bullying. So if we go back, me and you are roughly the same age, James.
Yes.
When you was bullied at school, roughly, you'd come home, you would have some sort of respite. Now there is no respite because they come home and they're hounded via social media, Snapchat, WhatsApp or anything else. And then we look at the world that we're currently living in and it's just all doom and gloom. Then we've gone through a massive credit crunch over the last 10, 15 years. So there's no doubt that children will be lying in bed hearing their parents talking about money worries, financial worries and everything else. Them children are absorbing this and that's even more pressure. And I know this better than anything, James, because you know yourself, 4 years ago, I lost my 16-year-old son who tragically took his own life. Children are under more pressure now than they've ever been. We're putting far too much pressure on them. Schools putting far too much pressure on them, and social media has an awful lot to say. And I think it's really important to discuss this today because it actually is Mental Health Awareness Week this week.
It is.
So I think you bringing this up today is absolutely brilliant. But children are under so much pressure, and telling them to get on with it or toughen up is not the answer. It really, really isn't. Because what we should be telling them to do is engage, to open up, to talk, telling boys that it's okay to be sad, it's okay to cry. It's not unmanly to cry. I love a good cry every now and then. It gets everything out of my system and makes me feel a whole lot better. It really does. But the crux of the point is kids are under so much pressure nowadays. They really, really are. We need to acknowledge this and not tell them to man up or grit and get on with it. It's just not the right attitude. I'm sorry, it's not.
Mate, I mean, what do I say to you except thank you for that, and obviously our prayers are with you and your family for what you've been through. But what do you say to the person listening? I'm not sure anyone would be crass enough to actually ring in and say this, but there might be texts and there'll certainly be people thinking it. I mean, other radio phone-ins will go there in a heartbeat. To the caller who says, for example, well, I had an abusive stepfather and we only had meat on Fridays and I grew up and I lived in a bucket and we had a fork in the sugar bowl. Someone who describes a terrible, terrible childhood and then insists that they're okay. So what are the younger generation moaning about? Because we hear a lot of that, Rob. We hear a lot of that.
We're living in a completely different environment to what we was 20, 30 years ago with social media, with schools, the pressure and everything else. We're living in a completely different environment. And whilst I understand what they're saying about the past, you have to acknowledge the environment we're living in and the fact we're living in an environment of social media, which is adding so much to children, and the stuff they're reading, the stuff they're looking at, which is impacting on their mental health. And let's be honest, let's bring up a starting figure here. Do you know roughly every 45 seconds somewhere in the world someone tragically takes their own life? Every 45 seconds somewhere in the world. Here in the UK, it's about every 8-9 minutes. So all this toughen up and all that is not good enough. We have to acknowledge the environment we're currently living in and the environment that children are growing up in at this moment in time, with social media, schools and everything else.
I can't argue with any of that. I really can't. I mean, we can cross our fingers, can't we, that the people announcing the policies understand it, and that if grit, the use of this word grit just involves a little bit of showing a little bit of ankle to the people who think kids just need to pull their socks up and be a bit tougher, then maybe that's a small price to pay if the policies are actually effective. They should talk to you a bit about it, shouldn't they? They should help you. Shall I say your son's name or not?
Yeah, you can say it. Yeah, absolutely.
It's Ethan, isn't it?
It is, and Ethan would have been 21 on the 1st of June.
Bless you all. Take care, Rob, and thank
Cheers,
you.
James.
Thank you for caring so much about the possibility of preventing other families from having to go through what you went through. God bless. It's 26 minutes after 11. So that's why I hate the word grit. And I wondered before Rob came on whether I was barking up the wrong. So what? It's just a word. But it's more than that, isn't it? It's a mindset. Tina's in Bourne End in Buckinghamshire. Tina, what would you like to say?
Hi. Firstly, I'd like to really say how much I echo everything the gentleman before said and how true it is. My kids are older, but I did want to say that when we talk about grit, I actually think this generation have a lot more emotional intelligence than we did. Yes. We were told to just get on with it. I put up with so much crap when I was a kid, and when I was at university and when I was a graduate. My youngest daughter is 25, that is slightly older.
Yes.
And she has shown enormous grit and emotional intelligence because she has decided that she's fed up of paying all her money in rent in London, working hard for somebody that was sexist and getting nowhere. And she said, right, I haven't got a future here. I'm going to go and travel for a year. I'm going to do something that gives me joy. And some people might say, well, she's given up. She's got a great job, whatever. But when I was her age, I could get a mortgage. I had a company car. I had somewhere to put all my gear. She's just dumped 4 carloads of stuff at my house, and I don't blame her because she's got to have something.
So she's cut an umbilical, hasn't she, to society almost. I mean, I talk a lot about the social contract. The social contract has not been kept in her case. An awful lot of people of that generation don't feel like we did, which is that if we put in X, we get out Y. And that seems like a decent trade-off. And it's a trade-off that allows you to endure difficulty because you see the light at the end of the tunnel. If there's no light at the end of the tunnel, then what is the point of enduring? And that can be a really bleak place to end up in. And that's when you display, I guess you've used grit in a positive context, you twinned it with emotional intelligence, but grit can also involve repression of the kind of feelings that you describe. People who hate their lives but have no choice or see little choice but to carry on doing what they're doing. And that way, of course, madness lies, or at least serious harm. And that is a very simple generational shift that an awful lot of in my day commentators either fail to or don't care enough to understand. It's incredibly
absolutely
different now. It's like you and Rob together coming at it from 2 very different angles, one of tragedy, one almost of liberation, both describing a very similar malaise.
But the other thing I would say is she would absolutely agree that she's in a privileged position because she has got a backdrop. She does know that we are here, her parents, waiting for her and can support her.
And
she was talking to somebody else that she works with in a completely different situation and the pressures he was under. And she caught him one night at his desk and he was just so distressed because he hadn't been given the tools at school to understand what he could ask for or the support. He didn't have the financial wherewithal. He was struggling to pay his rent. He was struggling to pay his lunch. My heart went out to him. And what she did, she took him aside. She tried to help him and tried to support him. And there are so many young people of that age doing all of that under such pressure and trying to keep their head above water.
You're right, and it is a privilege. I mean, it's not something that you can take for granted. And if people have a problem with the word privilege, just call it luck. I mean, it really is luck to have something beautiful and valuable that someone else doesn't have. Whether it's, and that's why I told the story about my friend at the top, because I don't think that is something that we are consciously envious of. You consciously, and so even as you listen to these calls from Tina and for Rob, and you think that they're right and children need more, I think there's something inside us that resents all of the talk about helping children and mental health, because we're kind of somewhere acknowledging the fact there's two things that exist in conjunction and in contradiction. So there's some envy here for the people who hate the idea of young people being better looked after. They're probably jealous that they weren't looked after themselves. But there's also a failure or a refusal to recognise that things are incredibly different now. So the well-meaning skeptic who just doesn't understand why these problems exist because they didn't exist when we were young, he or she is failing to recognise how much the world has changed. The unkind skeptic, the one who will thump his desk and write his columns about how young people today don't know they're born, he is either a complete fraud or dealing with his own trauma by lashing out and his own envy of people who are being looked after. I've had an extraordinary response to that story, and I knew I would. I'm not being cocky. I knew I would, because I had an extraordinary response to it when I heard it. You just go, oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. I'm jealous of my own child because my child is being better looked after than I was. Amelia Cox is here with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 11:34 and you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Some fascinating texts today, as you'd expect. This one, I think, is really, really helpful, and it may be proof that I'm at least partly barking up the wrong tree. Ali writes, I think there is a balance. Maybe grit was the wrong word, but as an ex-teacher and someone who has worked hard to build up my own resilience through therapy, I do see younger people finding it harder to pick themselves up following difficult circumstances. And it's a point picked up as well by Kate, who says, I'm a forest school teacher. Part of my job is to improve confidence and resilience by spending time in the forest, which I would call grit. The issue is children spend their whole lives being micromanaged by adults. From school to hobbies, it's an adult expert telling children what to do. And even at home, it's do this, do that. So I can see people nodding along with that, who will now balk at the next bit. And that, I guess, is the point of balance, because the next bit sounds a little bit woo to some older people. Part of forest school is that we are child-led. Children follow their instincts and innate curiosity without an adult guiding them. See, there'll be plenty of people thinking that the reason why children are resilient is because they get their own way too much. Is that we've become too child-led as a society. The in-my-day-itis condition will say, well, I got beaten as a child. I spent years, I've told you this a million times, I still can't quite believe it's true. I spent years claiming that being beaten regularly by my head teacher at school hadn't done me any harm at all. And so, I mean, it's obviously the case that letting children follow their instincts and innate curiosity without an adult guiding them would do them a power of good. But I suspect there's a widespread perception that they get too much, quotes, freedom, end quotes, as it is already. Wonderful text. I just want to clarify something, if I may, from Rob, an earlier caller, some stats that he dropped into his conversation. The Samaritans tell us that the equivalent of 19 people a day take their own lives. That's the figure we've got from 2023. It's important, particularly in the light of the work that the Samaritans do to get this stuff absolutely bang on. No criticism whatsoever of Rob. But if you are affected by any of the issues surrounding suicide or anything else that you feel the need to share but can't find anyone to share it with, the Samaritans are there for you 24 hours a day, and you get in touch with them at 116 123. Those are the official government statistics, just to clarify. 11:37 is the time. It's not just a question of helping young people deal with these challenges that didn't used to exist, but also helping older people understand that young people are dealing with challenges that didn't used to exist, I think. Lara is in Havering. Lara, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello, Lara.
I'd like to say that I don't think necessarily it's a bad thing to teach kids grit, but the truth of the matter is you've got a lot of adults telling you about their experiences when we're living in a time that I don't think is very unparalleled, to say the truth. Like, you're getting told that people's jobs are getting replaced by artificial intelligence. You're getting told that now people with degrees can't even find jobs in the jobs they've studied for. Like, I've got a lot of friends who are older than me who have degrees in, for example, like psychology. They want to go into like mental health work. They can't find jobs in that area, so they have to start doing like minimum wage jobs. And it's like, why did you go through the effort of getting a degree if you're not going to be able to use your degree to do work that you want to do? I think it's fine to have grit, but there needs to be an incentive. There needs to be like a reward at the end of all the hard work that you go through.
So you mean you could teach somebody or somehow magically wave a wand and imbue someone with all the resilience in the world, but it's not going to change the fact that their fortunes are pretty poor in comparison to previous generations.
Exactly. If you just know that no one can tell you, well, what is the solution to your jobs getting replaced by artificial intelligence? What are we meant to do if you're hearing stories about people getting laid off in the hundreds or thousands because their jobs are seen as no longer valuable because it can be replaced by a computer? Like, how are you meant to feel as though, oh, well, if I just work hard enough, how are you meant to feel like you can work hard enough to replace a computer?
Well, this isn't unique. This isn't unique to your generation. I mean, the same conversations happened when computers first appeared in the workplace, when robots first appeared on production plants, when car factories went from using men with spanners to using machines and robotic technology. And it's not in any way to denigrate or dilute your experience, but you raise an interesting question of why previous generations did manage to navigate some of the threats and the dangers that you described without reflecting the concomitant increase in mental health issues.
I just feel like sorry, that was my mum. But
what did she say?
She just said thank you, James. She loves listening to you.
That's nice.
But,
that's the thing, isn't it? And the answer there is going to be resilience. Do I sound a bit silly when I'm picking holes in the use of the word grit? Be honest with me.
No, I don't. I mean, honestly, I think, I got diagnosed with ADHD when I was like 18, and I'm on a gap year now because just finding out you had ADHD made why school was so difficult, makes so much sense. And I'm trying to go to university now, but it's been such a struggle because when universities see that, you failed your A-levels, it's like an instant rejection. So I've had to email them and be like, I know that this looks bad on paper, but I'm trying to retake my A-levels. I want to go to university. I want to get a degree. But it's like, even then, when I do get my degree, knowing the experiences of people like me, it's like, what hope am I meant to have that will lead to anything? I don't know what I'm going to do if I have my degree.
You're preempting slightly the conversation we were thinking about having in the next hour about degrees, but now I'm worried that it's going to add to the burdens of your generation. And the diagnosis will help. I mean, I know you know this, but for people listening who know a little bit less about it, the diagnosis will help, but it does also play into the hands of what you might call the professional or the performative skeptics who say things like, we just called it naughty in my day, or lazy, and you sort of think, well, that didn't do you any good at all, so why on earth wouldn't you want things to change? As the job changes, so as Gary reminds me, so the tools that you need in your toolbox will change. But your generation are absolutely in the eye of this storm. And I can't think of anything less helpful than taking examples from the 1980s when I was your age and somehow pretending that they have a relevance to what you lot are going through today. Thank you, Laura. What's your mum's name?
My mum's name Toyin. Her name's Toyin.
So thank you, Laura, and thank you, Toyin. Impeccable taste in radio, Laura's mother has. 11:42 is the time. Neil is in Reading. Neil, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi there, James.
Hello.
Morning. I think from when you started your opening, how do we go about this? What are we going to have people phoning in? But I think when we were taking our son to university a few years ago now, but we were quite asking. We're a long drive up to Durham, and we were asking, why do you think it's changed so much now compared to all the stories that I used to give him when we were growing up? And he was sort of saying along the lines of, for thousands of years, as human beings, we've been taking on board information slowly, slowly, and now it's just a bombardment of information that comes through from the phone.
Yeah. Not just the phone either. Even the telly, even the news on the telly was only twice a day.
So if you're at school, you grow up and you're reading. Your parents are reading the Daily Mail, so you end up reading Daily Mail.
Yeah.
Whereas now they're almost even subconsciously reading the Daily Mail, the Telegraph, the Times.
All the time.
They're just getting all this different information all the time. So it's very different, and it's just we're not sort of. Well, I'm not going to say design, but we're inherently through these thousands of years. It's just been information being given to us.
Bright. What was he studying? What was he studying at Durham? He sounds like a very bright lad.
Well, yeah, he's quite a deep thinker.
Yeah, clearly he is.
He's in sort of finance now, but he would like to go into law and finance. But
that's fantastic. Yeah, clever lad. He's done something. He must take after his mum, Neil.
Well, yeah.
You take care. Thanks. Have a lovely weekend. It's an important point to make. All the previous moral panics about societal or technological change were not built on anything like as deep foundations as the ones that we're going through now. I mean, what makes it difficult is the fact that all habitues or all experiences of previous moral panics thought that theirs was utterly unprecedented and like nothing else that had gone before. But this one really is. It's a difficult argument to make, but just think about it. Quite a few people getting in touch about forest schools, actually. There's one. I've just come back from a forest school session with my boy. Half of my job volunteering there is telling the teachers and parents to stop saying, "Be careful, don't do that." When they first start, the kids genuinely don't know what to do with themselves. After a few sessions, they're practically climbing the fence to get in. Self-guided, risk-aware play is so important for resilience, and kids just don't get space for it now. They're always on. They are, aren't they? That's a bit like what Neil's boy is talking about. You can't turn it off. Being bored and just touching grass is very, very underrated. I'm going to have to make a big change, aren't I? There's a word that I've had a problem with. It's not grit, but there is a word I've had a bit of a problem with over the last few years, and I think I was wrong to have a problem with it. I'll tell you what it is after this.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 11:48. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I didn't mention this earlier because it can be very difficult to establish the connection. But you will remember Victoria Rose, a consultant plastic surgeon who usually works for Guy's and St Thomas's and Chelsea and Westminster hospitals in London, but who has, or last time we spoke to her, was keen and struggling to get back to Gaza, where I'll let her tell you because Victoria Rose joins me on the line now. You've just arrived, I think, in Khan Younis in the south of Gaza, Victoria. What have you found compared to the last time you were there?
Well, we arrived on Tuesday, and actually the drive-in on the Saladin Road wasn't that different from August, but I think in August, they had already flattened virtually every building in Khan Younis. So really, we were just driving through the same rubble again. But what is really noticeable is the number of people. So where we are is very near Al-Mawasi, which is the humanitarian zone. And in August, that was absolutely rammed and you could not move. And now it's probably 50% occupied. And what happened during the last ceasefire is that everybody went back to the north to try and see what was left of their homes, which is worrying, really, because the offensive has started in the north today. So there's a huge number more targets than there were before the last ceasefire. But probably the biggest issue now is the state of the population. They haven't had any food for 75 days, and it's visible. The children are really cachectic. My colleague is worried about the hair of his 2-year-old daughter falling out. They really are not in good condition.
And what sort of cases are you working on in the hospital itself? What sort of injuries and conditions are we dealing with?
So I started today with 3 children who've been burnt in bomb blasts, and then we've had an adult who has over 50% burns from another bomb blast, lots of shrapnel injuries, a young girl who's got an open pelvic fracture. She was hit by a car as she was running away from a blast, and she's got quite a devastating injury to her right lower leg, which one of my colleagues has had to repair the major artery to her leg. And we've just been trying to reconstruct the skin over the top of it. So it's been quite a packed morning already. We're getting through a huge number of cases. The staff are really pleased that we're here. It's the same team that we worked with in August, so lots of smiles when we turned up yesterday, and we're really cracking through it, but there's a lot to do.
Could you briefly contrast the working conditions there with the working conditions you're used to at home?
I'm sorry, there's a bit of gunfire in the background now. Well, yes, I don't have gunfire and bombs going off in London. But I mean, mainly it's lack of supplies. I mean, we did a burn on a 6-month-old this morning, and in the UK, we would have dressed that burn with a very specialist dressing called BioBrain, which means that you can basically leave it on and it heals the burn, and then once the burn is healed, it falls off by itself, so you don't have to put the child through multiple dressing changes. We don't have any of that here, so we're down to basic gauze and bandaging, which means I'm going to have to change that child's dressing every other day until it heals. So it's that type of problem that we've got. We really have we've run out of blades. I managed to buy 2 boxes. This is blades for knives for our scalpels. They told me that they'd run out, so I bought 2 boxes. So we've got 200 now. But looking at, we're here for 3 to 4 weeks, so I think we're going to get through all of those and need some more.
How hard was it to get in this time, in terms of the paperwork and the
Relatively easy. So we submitted the same paperwork as last time, and it seemed to work okay. The difference this time is they've closed the Kerem Shalom crossing, so we had to drive to Kisafim, which is sort of halfway down Gaza on the Israeli side, and that's not really a proper crossing. It's an emergency crossing that they've opened. And so there was quite a wait there for the UN vehicles to get into the compound on the Israeli side. We were transferred in 7 armoured vehicles, and we had a bit of a wait there. But the biggest thing that's noticeable is the number of people that are allowed in. We were, I think, at 44, and only 7 of us got granted permission to travel. So it's very small numbers. And speaking to the UN and the WHO, it's about 50% of everyone that applies that's getting in at the moment.
I hope this isn't a silly question, but it's another comparison, if you don't mind. In terms of workload as opposed to working conditions, the speed and the volume of work that you have to do compared to what it would be like in London.
Well, it's a totally different setup because we don't anaesthetize the patients in the same way. A lot of what we're doing is done under sort of ketamine and sedation. So a lot of the turnaround time, our anaesthetists are very, precision driven in the UK, and the patients are put to sleep in an anteroom to the main operating theatre, and they're often intubated or some form of airway is put in, and then they're given an intravenous anaesthetic or an inhalation anaesthetic, and then they're taken into the operating room, and their vital signs are monitored. We attach them to various monitors to make sure that we know how deep they are under anaesthetic. We're monitoring their blood pressure, their heart rate, all of that. Most of them will be catheterized. They'll have an art line in. None of that happens here. They're sedated. Very occasionally, an airway will be put in if we're doing something that might take a long time. So the turnaround is huge. There's not much monitoring of the patients while they're under sedation. There's the rudimentary sort of blood pressure and heart rate, but that would be it. A lot of the time, we don't have an anaesthetist. We have an anaesthetic nurse specialist. So we're able to put more people to sleep. So more theatres are running. So it's a very different setup, and everybody seems to sort of have a similar role. So all of my theatre staff will assist me and, help put dressings on, clean wounds. They'll do a bit of stitching. I sort of tell them what to do, and they'll crack on, which means that we move at a much faster pace.
You were very sanguine a moment ago about the gunfire in the background. But for people who haven't heard you on this board talking to me before, why do you do it? It
sounds really bizarre, but it's quite addictive when you come here and you see what a huge difference you can make just by turning up and standing with your medical colleagues. But the other thing really for me is there is no plastic surgery in Gaza at the moment. There are no trained Gazan plastic surgeons left here. So there's nobody that's really capable of treating the injuries that they're seeing. And I think, as I explained to you last time, all these types of injuries are very much bread and butter plastics trauma. So, again, people have been waiting for us to come in. And this time I've come in with 2 other plastic surgeons. So we've a huge workload that's built up because people know that we're here. And I think it's very difficult when you know that you've got these skills and you can make a difference to sit at home and do nothing and watch it or not watch it on the news. It's hard not to get involved.
Okay. Some people don't find it that hard not to get involved. So thank you for what you're doing. And final question, what happens to your patients if you're not there?
Well, a lot of them are sort of just looked after from a basic medical point of view. So their wounds are dressed, kept as clean as they can. And it's a sort of a hope situation that they'll make some recovery, or if not, they'll go for amputations. And that's really what happens. A lot of the burns, that don't heal will end up with really deforming contractures that will need surgery later in life. It's if they survive, it's great. If they don't, it pushes the problem further into the future, really.
Victoria Rose, thank you. As always happens when you come on this programme, some of your former patients in London are getting in touch to tell me how wonderful you are. But I think thanks, John. But I think we've already established that. And take care. I think you've stepped out of theatre, have you, to talk to us?
I have, yes, I have. I need to go back.
Let me detain you no longer, for goodness sake. Victoria, thank you, and do take care. Victoria.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Consultant plastic surgeon, as you heard, normally at Guy's and St Thomas's or indeed Chelsea and Westminster Hospital, currently at Nasser Hospital in Khan Younis in South Gaza, and the gunfire being a particularly pertinent moment in that interview because, according to witnesses, it was yesterday that Khan Younis reported airstrikes on the city from early morning, with many bodies being taken to the morgue in the hospital where Victoria is now working, and according to eyewitness reports, some bodies arriving in pieces. Anyone else feeling a little bit inadequate about the shift that you're putting in today? And it's kind of, great, yeah. What did you do today? What an amazing woman. What an incredible thing it is that she does. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I meant it, actually, when I said to the earlier caller that we may have to rethink our plans with regard to the conversation about degrees. But actually, I think it's important to look at what betrayals may be underway, particularly in light of the conversation we had before we spoke to Victoria about the pressures that our young people are now under.
James O'Brien on LBC.
3 minutes after 12 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I mean, this is a tough one, really, because it will add to the burdens that young people are carrying that we were discussing in the last hour. Needless to say, the admiration and love coming in for Victoria Rose is boundless and quite correct too. A lot of you, as I did, picking up on her extraordinary modesty as well as her extraordinary courage. And the word, I told you, I can't stop. I can't carry on denigrating the word resilient, can I? Because if you need a better word, resilience is a good thing. The problem is, as with grit, is the language, the vocabulary can play into the hands of people who think that everything can be fixed with a stiff upper lip or a dose of Epsom salts. But I think I need to rethink my resilience. I need to rethink my attitude to resilience. Maybe we all do. An really interesting piece in the Guardian newspaper this week by one of my favourite writers, Gabby Hinsliff. And I missed it. And the reason I had my attention drawn to it today was because of the response that it received on the letters page of the newspaper. They're very old-fashioned places, letters pages, because we're so used now to the comment section of websites, which are largely completely unmoderated. By which I simply mean anyone can post whatever they want there, whereas a letters page is actually edited. Somebody has the job of deciding which letters are worthy of publication. So they're much happier, more informative and enlightened places. And of course, a decent letters editor puts both sides of all arguments in the as long as there are two sides to every argument. They wouldn't necessarily be printing Andrea Leadsom's thoughts on the World Trade Organization. But I don't know, maybe that's unfair. Maybe they would have done. So the letters page prompted me to go back to the original article. And it's interesting. It's also another example, perhaps, of the generational shift that we're currently living through. It's boomerang season again, she wrote. Or to put it another way, the time of year when adult children you imagined might be flying the nest come home instead to roost, a ritual that seems to happen every year. And she looks at two or three elements of this. I suppose the return home when you were not expecting to return home is something we could talk about. We've had some fun chats about that in the past. But here it is. The idea that young people were promised a payoff. They were promised a ticket to a better life when they signed up for their degrees. Tony Blair, of course, made great play of extending tertiary education to half of the population. And I thought at the time that was a wonderful thing because I'm very conscious of privilege, as you know, not from a particularly po-faced perspective, but just because I've always understood it to be a synonym for luck. And if you're trying to extend something that you secure through luck to ever more people, eventually it stops being a matter of luck and instead becomes a matter of right or a matter of expectation. So the more people have something, the less privileged you are to have that thing. So and not everyone was impressed, I don't think, at the time. It's so long ago, I can barely remember. I wasn't even doing this job, which gives you an idea of how long ago it was. But they're not getting it. They're not getting the ticket to a better life that they were promised. They're leaving university with huge amounts of debt and, well, she puts it really well, better than I can. Young people in line for good degrees from good Russell Group universities who have for years obediently jumped through every hoop provided, and this is after graduation, not in the university holidays, are working in bars, going travelling, or despondently applying to companies that they know use AI, not only to sift their CVs, but sometimes to conduct first interviews. And on that subject of companies using AI to do stuff like that, my guest on Full Disclosure this week, Laura Bates, who was the architect of Everyday Sexism, an incredibly powerful feminist, one of the most impressive people I've interviewed in quite a long time in terms of the challenges they face and their commitment to their task. But she's really worried about how AI may set equality or feminism back in ways that hardly anybody else has picked up on yet. And that I'll play you a little clip of that later in this hour. But just to give you a heads up, that's what Laura's new book is about. And that is what much of our interview was about. But Gabby Hinsliff goes on. Imagine sitting alone in front of a webcam, trying to land your first proper job and being evaluated by a bot with whom you can't even shake hands, let alone kindle memories of how hard it was getting a foot in the door when they were young. I didn't even know about that until I spoke to Laura. So I think that could be question number one. Have you ever been interviewed by AI? 0345 6060 973. A common enough experience now to merit my question, I think. But that's not the central thrust of this. Can you tell when I've got a topic that I don't like? Can you tell when I feel that we have a responsibility to talk about something, but I really don't want to because I don't like it? The question I'm about to ask is a question I'm frightened to ask in case your answer is yes. Do you see what I mean? One way you can tell is because it takes me so bloody long to get to the actual question, but that's probably true even of topics that I'm madly in love with as well, so that doesn't really help. And I mentioned Tony Blair for obvious reasons, and I mentioned my own luck in life or privilege or whatever you want to call it. It's certainly in educational terms, if not in looks. But the idea that it was an unalloyed and obvious good thing to extend tertiary education to as many people as possible, to make university feasible, viable, plausible for people from socioeconomic classes for whom it never had been before. And looking at this article, looking at the numbers, imagining what it would be like, 140 applications for every graduate job, according to the Institute of Student Employers just last year. It's almost the Hunger Games, as Gabby Hinsliff suggests in her article, and it's about to get tougher because the labour market is likely to slow down, whether because of national insurance rises or international trade wars or just a general air of uncertainty. Doesn't really matter if you're in the business of hoping to get a graduate level job. So that's the other thing, isn't it? I belong, and the first ever subject that made me realise that my own experiences were largely meaningless was universities. Can you remember that? What was it, 5 years ago? Maybe more. I was in the middle of one of my usual spiels about university being valuable for reasons other than degree classifications or job opportunities, and how it broadens your horizons and introduces you to lots of people you may not otherwise have encountered, and it teaches you what I'm now quite happy to call resilience. And I suddenly realised I didn't have anything like the experience that young people today have in the simple, single context of loans and fees. I had to borrow a bit. I can't even remember how much. It didn't hang over me. Paid it off years ago. I didn't have tuition fees. I didn't have to borrow money to get a degree. So the entire relationship with university is different, because if you have to borrow money to get it, then I suspect it's very, very hard not to see it as a straight exchange for advancement. It is an investment in your future. You are speculating to accumulate. If you didn't have to borrow a lot of money to go through university, and people a little bit older than me didn't have to borrow anything, then you can have an entirely different attitude to it. So when Tony Blair announces that he wants everybody to go to university, I think it's a wonderful thing for society, because while it will not necessarily guarantee you a better job at the end of the process, 3 years learning stuff, doing critical thinking, hanging out, making friends, doing more partying than you'll probably be able to do if you're holding down a job. 3 years of all of that is just great. It's just wonderful. What's not to like? Answer, 50, 60, 70 grand's worth of debt. Or whatever the figure may be for you. And so you end up now looking at the number of young graduates who can't get jobs for which a degree is not just not necessary, but not even relevant. And of course the debt and the numbers, the shrinking numbers, the shrinking amount of opportunity and the growing number of applicant. Demand is shrinking and supply is running out of control. I don't know what the AI is going to do to the bigger picture. I don't know what it's currently doing. I do know that I'd love to speak to somebody who's been interviewed by AI, but I don't know whether or not it is as commonplace or as widespread as this article suggests. How does it work? Is it like doing Max Headroom on Channel 4 100 years ago? Do you remember Max Headroom on Channel 4 was supposed to be a robot. I think it was just a human being typing words that would then be repeated in a robotic voice, but I don't know. So I'm in my early 50s. My children are university age, nearly. Our youngest, nearly. One's there. There's a class issue here. Still, I think, a middle-class presumption that university will follow A-levels. Not many people, perhaps, in my class, my social class, not my school class, wondering whether it's actually worth it. Means they're more likely to be the ones that end their degree period and conclude that it's not. It's not worth it. You can tell. I'm not doing it. I'm pushing the question. I'm just giving it another nudge. Talk about kicking the can down the road. I don't want to say this because of that class point. That's why. There you go. At least I've worked out why I hate this question so much. So middle-class kids like me and mine are less likely to decide that it's not for them. Which is why asking the question of whether too many people go to university feels loaded to me. So we'll go back to Gabby Hinsley's piece. And when she went back to her old Cambridge college recently, she was struck by the number who still didn't know what they would be doing when they graduated, and by the sense that they had resigned themselves to a very long haul. If it's tough for them, it's worse for others. You've got stories all over social media about young people firing off hundreds of applications and trekking to endless assessment centres. What's an assessment? What happens? All to no avail, with lots of people telling them they should move abroad because Britain is finished, Britain is broken. So I want positive stories as well as negative, but I can only work with what you give me. Are we sending too many people to university? And if the answer to that is yes, are we watching a reverse to class-based social segregation? Are we and obviously the more obvious answer for you to provide, or the more obvious question for you to answer is, was it a massive waste of time and money? 0345, and you are not just welcome, but actively encouraged to answer no to that question as well as yes. But was it a massive waste of time and money? 0345 6060 973. And are we sending too many? You can't. I mean, if it's a transaction, if it's a borrowed money in return for career enhancement, how can you answer that we're not sending too many? Because they're not getting the career enhancement, but they're still borrowing the money. Hit the numbers now. You will get through. 0345 6060 973.
James O'Brien on LBC.
A perfect storm on the horizon, if that is meteorologically correct. A lot of universities facing existential crisis, particularly with this government's determination to discourage foreign students from coming here. Foreign students subsidise the education of domestic students, even as domestic students secure huge debts, huge levels of debts in order to do their degree. The debts would be even bigger if the foreign students were not paying so much to study at the same institutions. But if that is as cold an investment as it should be, or as it seems to me to be, they're not getting the dividend. They're not getting the payoff that they expect when they take out that debt. And that means they're not getting the career enhancement that they are expecting and in some cases buying or hoping or paying for. Which means I got to just stop being so self-indulgent. I might hate this question because I'm worried about what the answers are going to be, but I'm not going to find out what the answers are unless I stop warbling and start opening up the phone lines. Is it the case that we send too many young people to university, and those from less privileged backgrounds are the ones that are being most heavily betrayed? Sharon is in Grays in Essex. Sharon, what would you like to say?
Well, we're from a less privileged background, without a doubt, and my daughter is the very first person in the whole of our family to have ever gone to university. And the pride we felt. And when she joined uni...
Tell me, don't just say the pride we felt. Tell me about the pride you felt.
Well, you know, I've been on your programme before. I'm a survivor of abuse. I've lived in a very, very bad childhood, and I had a very struggled adulthood, bringing up my 3 children alone. But my kids made me very proud. But my daughter, she said, Mum, I want to go to university. I want to be a criminologist. I want to catch people like your abuser. for the rest of my life. That's what I want to do.
Wow.
So she done political science, she done criminology. She got a first degree. She done 3 years, got a first degree, and ended up working in a supermarket. Could not get a job anywhere. She wasn't bothered. It was a job. She was okay.
Right.
Then she joined the police. They snapped her up. She's been there 12 years. She's still paying off her student loan. And that was only at $3,000 a year. Imagine what they're paying off when they go in at $9,000. She's now in her 30s. She's been paying her student loan off. She got a first degree, and she cannot get the job in the sector that she got the degree in.
Does she feel that university was a waste of time? I sense that you
Without a doubt.
She does. She didn't. You don't.
She said, all I've done is spent 3 years sitting on my backside, learning something that I'll never be able to use to get into debt.
It's a fairly bleak analysis, isn't it? Did she not need a degree to go into the force at the level she went in at? She didn't go in as a graduate.
Yeah, she did use her degree as part of her reference and stuff. But to be honest, her friend, who's also in the police, she done an exam for the police and got in through that. So it doesn't have to be a degree to get in the police force.
You, not for the first time, are the perfect caller, aren't you, in a way, because of the pride that you felt and because of the sense of promise that this involved.
And the sense of complete letdown that the government and this country have given to us, the complete and utter letdown. Do you know, we're all economic slaves. Basically, we go to work, we earn our money, and then the government finds every single way to get that money that you've earned out of your pocket and into their banks.
Well, they do use it to provide us with all the things that we need to keep society functioning.
No, they don't. We do that. We provide
that with
our money.
No, they use it to provide all the things.
But they also use it in a very unworthy way. They waste a lot of our money, as you know, James.
I'm not arguing with you about it. I mean, obviously, I'm not arguing with you about it. But I don't necessarily think that the failure of graduates to get. They've been let down, but I don't think anyone's done it on purpose. They've been let down by.
I advise all parents who have got children that they say they've got to get a degree. They've got to get a degree. Please don't put that pressure on me.
This is why I said you were the perfect caller. This is why I said you were the perfect caller because of my class and background. I'll still encourage my girls to go. You see, even and that's not fair, is it? Because
you're putting pressure on them to have a future and a career that they're not going to. They might, but they might not be able to get. But the main thing is, you're putting your children into 20 odd years of debt.
Yeah, no, and I know that I know the debt used to be arranged in a way that was better than almost all other debt, but even that's changed a bit subsequently. Thank you, Sharon. And did they take away your sense of pride then with what happened afterwards?
Yeah.
You should still be proud of the girl.
With anger.
You should still be proud of her, though.
Oh, believe me, it's my daughter. I could not be prouder of what she achieved, but the deceit that I feel that she was fed, and the letdown from the country for not helping provide these kids. But interest has gone up and up.
Yeah.
You go to see the interest on the loans now. She can't get rid of the debt because she's paying so much interest.
And that is something that is going to depend, or the attractiveness or otherwise of it is going to depend entirely upon the family's financial situation. You're going to be more perturbed by those numbers according to the financial security of the family that you're in. I mean, it's just a given. That's not an opinion. It's counting. Thank you, Sharon. 23 minutes after 12 is the time. Alice is in Leeds. Alice, what made you pick up the phone?
Hi there, James. Nice to speak to you.
You're very welcome.
I've recently completed my degree a year ago. I did it in civil engineering.
Oh, yes.
I'm now on a construction site, and there's a couple of... I'm the lowest paid on the site, for one, with the highest degree. There's two lads that can barely read or write, and they're on double the pay as me.
You've not got me on, have you, on the site? I don't think you're making any friends with that little nugget of information. How do you know that? How do you know that, A, you're the lowest paid, and B, they're on... We've had the conversation with them.
Yeah, we were discussing it, and they were surprised at how much I was being paid, and they were saying, oh, well, when you get fully qualified, and I was like, well, I've got a master's degree. I am fully qualified.
So what's gone wrong here, in your view? Because some elements of this are a little bit confusing. Does your master's degree mean that for you the roof is higher than it is for them, but at the moment you're on a lower rung?
Yeah, so to be a site engineer, you need a degree currently, but the degree you need doesn't teach you any engineering and construction.
Right.
It just teaches you how to design it. So the idea is you would do that and then maybe go into a design office or be, I don't know, head of something. But if you just want to be a site engineer, you have to go for a whole degree. It's a catch-22, really.
Well, it's a very specific experience that you've had as well. If you could reset the clock and start again, would you still do the degree?
I would probably just go into being a ground worker on site, and then maybe.
And then how would you ever become an engineer?
They've promoted people up to that. You learn on the job and get experience, but that's never advertised to you as an option. It has to be through a degree. Do you know what I mean? The option's there to do it. The options of apprenticeships and just getting into a job. Like, although the degree's given me experience, it's also taken 5 years.
Wow.
It isn't in job experience.
No, and who do you? I don't want to say. I say blame. Whose fault is this? I mean, who do you feel might have misled you? You sound surprised at what you've discovered when you got on a site. Who do you feel is responsible for misinforming you or giving you the wrong information or expectations?
I would say it would probably be secondary school.
Oh, okay.
I went to a state secondary school, and the push was just to get. Obviously, it looks very good for them if they can say half the year's going to uni,
right,
or whatever. They don't quite tell you the other routes into industry because they just want to have. What my view is, they just want to have as many people they can say have been to uni.
Yeah, that
in
makes
their sixth form or whatever.
Of course, it does for league tables and for trying to tempt in the new cohort of pupils. And final question. Did university not prepare you for what you've discovered now that you're on a site?
It did. I mean, prepares you how? I mean, I know how to rent a house with renters' rights and all of that. I now know.
I meant the engineer. I mean, when you're doing a degree, no one ever said when you start, you're going to be at the very, very bottom of the ladder, and people with no degrees are going to be above you because ... I don't know.
I don't think so. I think that. In uni, they don't really say about like your end job and what money you're going to be on.
No, of course they don't.
How do you pass that year, I guess, and then these are your job options. They're not really, it's more on like a hope and a pray that, you go into that job and you like it, and then maybe you can fight the ladder up. But if you don't want to fight the ladder up, then only so many people can go up that ladder. And
that is the bit that you're not taught. And in fact, it's worse than not being taught it or not being told it. You're almost, or possibly not even almost, you're fed the opposite view. There's plenty to go round, and it's only upon graduation or as graduation approaches that you realise how difficult it is. It's coming up to 12:28, and Alan is in Sheffield. Alan, what would you like to say?
I'm probably quite a good example of the whole process in that I went to university in 1976 on a full grant with no fees. I then got a grant to do my master's and I got a grant to do my PhD. I then worked as a principal lecturer in politics and also marketing and recruitment in charge of the department. So I saw the way in which the marketing aimed at quite vulnerable people to get them into university on the basis of a myth, really, because certainly after one of the reasons I retired is that I didn't think we were doing students any favours at all by giving them the impression that if they got a degree, the world was their oyster, and it actually wasn't, particularly in some of the lower universities. And that's why I think really now we've got to look at graduates, apprenticeships, and reduce the number of universities places to actually stop ripping people off, because they're paying, I worked out when I was listening to the old programme before, probably £75,000 for a 3-year degree.
Right.
Because you've got to include the tuition fees, and you've got to include living costs.
Living expenses, yeah, of course.
And certainly in somewhere like Sheffield, you're looking at probably £400, £500 a month for a room in a house. And
all of that's fine. All of that's fine if you're getting a special ticket at the end of it.
But the special tickets have gone. I mean, when I went to university, and this might sound horrible, but 7% of the population went. Only 2 people from my secondary modern school went to university, and I got there by a fluke in many ways.
This is why, and this is where it gets personal for me as well as for you, because even, I mean, I was only 4 in 1976, but I'm pretty sure that 90% of people who went to my school would have gone to university even then. And there's no earthly way that across the spectrum of all of those kids, that my school was full of cleverer kids than yours. It was an entirely class-based access.
And the irony was, one of the good things I could do as recruitment officer for students is actually give people, particularly working class kids, a chance to come in with no qualifications. And both of those lads got first-class degrees. But under the system now, where academics don't do the recruitment, it's fielded out to admin staff. You don't have that chance anymore to even get the bright kids in. And also, I mean, the standard of teaching when I retired, and one of the courses I taught in American politics, which is a very good course. I sound a bit like Trump then, sorry about that. But
it was the best. It was the best course.
Oh, yeah. But I was replaced by a 22-year-old graduate from another university who replaced somebody with 30 years' experience, and he lasted 3 weeks.
Aye. When did it start? What was the pendulum moment or the pivotal moment?
I think when fees first came in, I think we began to we thought that would improve attendance.
Yes.
Because attendance was always a problem. I mean, we were quite hard line in terms of getting students to sign in for lectures. But then, when I was covering for some of my other colleagues, I discovered that no one was turning up for any of the seminars.
Oh, that surprises me.
Why?
Well, because I never turned up for any, but I wasn't paying. So I always thought, like you, I remember stories about students getting cross during lecturers' strikes, whereas in my day, we'd have taken that as a win. That was like a free holiday.
Yeah, the lecture strikes were another pivotal moment, really, in terms of one of the reasons I left the industry, because I was quite old. I was 56, 57, so the pension strikes didn't even affect me because I had a guaranteed pension.
Okay, yeah.
But all my younger colleagues in a politics department scabbed.
God, there's a word. There's a word that's more popular in Sheffield than it is in some parts of the country, but they all scabbed. So then the cohesion of the whole academic community began to splinter and fall apart. You paint a picture of a bleak present, never mind a bleak future. Where would you put the figure? Back to 7%?
No. That was elitism. I mean, I think that, as I say, apprenticeship degrees, using more workplace placements. Yeah. I mean, my youngest son did a wonderful degree.
I've only just looked at the clock. Sorry, I haven't got time for it. But the problem with what you describe is the death of that thing I still subscribe to, which is how university is not just about your degree and your future job prospects. Yeah, but you're not going to get that on an apprenticeship or a vocational one. You're not going to be able to study Renaissance poetry, are you, if you're training to be an engineer?
No, but the problem is, that breadth of study. When I did geography in my first degree, and my tutor was a magnificent man who set me on my course to be nice to other people. And what he did is he saw us every week, and then he took all these tutors out to see Ken Dodd at the Liverpool Empire.
That sounds like a dive. I mean, I'm already jealous. What an incredible thing to do. I warned you I was running late, and Tim Humphries itching to get started with the very latest news headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
35 is the time. It's odd, isn't it, that we pay tribute to people when they pass away. We should probably do it rather more when they're here to hear it. But I do just want to take a moment to reflect upon the death of Andrew Norfolk, a brilliant journalist for the Times newspaper, who did something that very, very, very few journalists ever do in their careers. He blew the lid off a massive story. He was the journalist who first reported on the crimes that have subsequently become known as grooming gangs, where men of disproportionately Pakistani origin were found to be abusing girls who were disproportionately white, and he started doing that in 2010. It's the only reason or January of 2011, I think, focusing on Rotherham. It's the only reason we've been reporting it now for the best part of 14 years on this programme was because Andrew Norfolk led the way. He subsequently expressed grave misgivings about how it had been jumped on as an issue by the far right, because Emily Maitlis did an interview with that strange man who got chucked out of Reform yesterday, in which she repeatedly wondered why he only cared about victims of child sex abuse when the perpetrators were brown, given that the overall numbers point to much, much, much more crime being committed by white people. But it doesn't take away from the fact that Andrew Norfolk identified something that was socially or culturally relevant and pertinent, the exploitation of white girls by predominantly Asian men, albeit that his worst fears about how the far right may weaponize the issue turned out to be justified. He's also the reason why the law got changed. If you speak to Nasser Hospital, who was the chief prosecutor in the Northwest at the time, and his response to Andrew Norfolk's work was to go to the Director of Public Prosecutions, a bloke called Keir Starmer, I don't know what happened to him, and get them to return to cases that had ended unsatisfactorily or hadn't even been pursued. So that's the second thing he achieved that hardly any journalist ever achieved, is that he changed the way that the authorities acted on an issue, having brought that issue to the public's attention for the very first time. I will continue to mark his memory by resisting attempts by not just the far right these days, but an increasing number of opportunistic politicians and pundits to hijack his work in an attempt of whipping up hatred against all Asian men or all Muslim men, when in fact it would make as much sense to do that as it would to hate all white men for the hideous crimes committed by a small number of them. It is 12:38. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. It is a grim, grim question. Do we send too many kids to university? And are we betraying the ones that we've sent? Have we betrayed the ones that we sent? Nobody knew that the opportunities would diminish so enormously when they introduced this system. But our last caller, Alan, makes it pretty clear that universities may have played an unpleasant role, an unflattering role in selling a dream to children that they knew, or to young people that they knew was unattainable. Let's go to Birmingham. Matt is there. Matt, what would you like to say?
Hello. So I didn't go to university. I'm of an age where the uni fees had just come in. If I'd have gone to uni in like 99, I would have been paying, what was it, £1,000 a year or £3,000 a year.
Yeah.
And
is that what put you off?
No, not at all. I had gone to college. I was doing IT, and I got headhunted by a small software development company. Okay. And I got into work at 18. It paid the bills, and me and my partner were able to get our first place. But I've worked hard. I've worked bloody long hours, and now at the age of 44, I mean, last time I looked at it, I'm in the top 12% of earners. I don't know what that speaks to these days with the cost of living crisis, but sure. I'm pretty proud of that.
Good for you.
My daughter went to university. She qualified 2 years ago. She got first in psychology and criminology. She really wants to work in that field. For a while now, she's been working as an SEN teaching assistant in a school. Yeah. It doesn't pay very much.
No, for sure.
And she's been looking at opportunities to advance in the field that she studied in and that she loves. But she's starting to realise that in order to progress in any meaningful way, it's looking like she's going to have to do a master's, PhD.
And then no guarantee.
Again, yeah, but it's more money. And my son, when he was younger, I sent him to a private drama school.
Oh, yeah.
Because he loves drama. So now he's at university studying drama. His student loan doesn't even cover his accommodation, which he shares with his girlfriend. So me and his mother send him about $400 a month to help pay for his food and stuff.
So it's costing you a fortune to get your kids' degrees.
Yeah, and we didn't... Like with Ethan's, my son, with his degree in drama when he qualifies, drama, everyone knows it's such a hard field. There's never any guarantee he's going to get meaningful work, but it's his passion, so we supported it. And with my daughters, again, we didn't know it was going to guarantee work, but with the state of employment these days, we still felt it was the best option for them.
Yeah.
Even though it wasn't what
And you've given them
me
something
where I
else as well. You've given them something else as well. A kind of, I mean, this lad Dave puts it pretty well. He says to ask if we're sending too many people to university is like asking if we're sending too many sick people to hospital, because education is an end in itself. And we're talking, this whole hour has been conducted on the presumption that it's a means to an end, and of course it's not. But in the course of our lifetime, it's become more end and less means, and I beg your pardon, more means and less end. And your kids are shining examples of people who've done it in the hope, if not even the expectation, of a return that is unlikely to occur. The return is unlikely to happen.
It was definitely more of a hope than an expectation.
Okay. And does it change? I mean, if you could reset the clock, would you discourage them from going?
No, I wouldn't.
Why not?
One of the factors... Well, I know a lot of the people did really scream about the change that the coalition made to the funding model for universities and to the interest and the way the loans work.
Yes.
But the fact, it is a very real thing that the fact that the student loan doesn't impact your ability to get a mortgage and things like that, and the rate at which they pay it back, they may never pay it off during their working lives.
That's very true.
But it's not really going to materially impact their lives. So it was a thing like you sort of need to try and get ahead.
Oh, fair. You're a great dad, by the sounds of it. I
like to think so.
Well, good for you. And it puts me in a nice position because I can ask you this question. I wouldn't be able to answer it myself. Do you see them as people who have enjoyed, and in your boy's case, are enjoying the benefits of university? As having... Hang on. As having... Do they have something you don't have? Has university given them something intangible that you don't feel you have?
I could speak to my wife's experience. When my wife talks about university, definitely,
right.
The experience she had at university with the partying and the friendships and stuff.
Yes.
Definitely. She's like at our wedding. It's our first wedding anniversary today.
Oh.
At our
Congratulations.
wedding, she had so many university friends there, and I had none. It was mainly family from my side. Yeah. My children, my son actively hates it. He's at Bournemouth University, and he said if it wasn't for him and his girlfriend being there together, he would have quit first year.
Oh dear.
But he still feels like he needs the degree
in order to get the training really with drama as much as the degree, isn't it? He needs. It's a weird one, that, and I'm not going to be ungallant and inquire after your wife's age. That would be very rude of me. But it's clearly a generational difference. And that's why I no longer feel I'm qualified to contribute to these conversations with my own experiences. Maybe soon as a father, like Matt has just done, but certainly not as a former student. And that's quite interesting, is that he doesn't feel, I don't think, that his children got that intangible thing. The thing Dave wrote about so powerfully, being, a bit like suggesting no one should go to university. It's like suggesting no one should go to the doctors. Too many people are going to the doctors. And he wrote, and I've lost the message now, but he wrote from a perspective of being very dyslexic and being so jealous. The only time he went to university was in his work as a carpenter, in his work as a chippy. And he was just so jealous of the people who had that life of the mind, if you want to call it that. But I'm not even sure at most universities that is what you get these days. It's 12:45.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 12:48. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where the conversation about degrees continues. I did, however, promise you a tale of refugees. Well, there's so many negative stories about refugees. I thought it'd be nice to share a positive one, because I don't know if you're aware of the fact that Donald Trump's administration has started inviting refugees into the United States of America, even as they deport Americans. If you are a white Afrikaner, you are welcome in the US. And indeed, one of them, a chap called Charles Kleinhaus, has already made the trip. He's settling in the United States, enjoying refugee status. Here's some of the things he posted on Twitter in 2023. Jews are untrustworthy and a dangerous group. And he later shared a YouTube video that was removed entitled "We'll Shoot Illegal Immigrants, Poland's Illegal Islamic Immigrant Solution." And he contributed some clapping emojis to that. He's also a big fan of the conspiracy theory that white people in South Africa are being particularly persecuted, a sort of online far-right lie that has informed, as far as I can tell, the entire policy, quite possibly at the behest of Donald Trump's biggest financial backer, Elon Musk, who was born and raised in South Africa and turned Twitter into precisely the sewer that allowed this character to post the kind of anti-Semitism that I've just shared with you. Of course, the reason that the government gives for deporting pro-Palestinian protesters in the United States of America at the moment is anti-Semitism. Make of that what you can, because it's pretty clear to me. 12:49 is the time. Let's talk to Ado, who's in Solihull, and then I'll play you a little clip of the interview with Laura Bates, because she talks in it about how AI is going to change the way that interviews are conducted and change the way that job searches are done, and quite almost certainly, unless something is done soon to stop it, almost certainly set back feminism, set back equality in the workplace, because the algorithms will be tuned to what is currently normal, and what is currently normal is unfair. So that's coming up. I haven't had a single call off anyone who thinks that they've been, well, you'd know, wouldn't you, if you'd been interviewed by AI? So that's the only thing missing from this week. You've got 8 minutes to rectify it. No one has called me who's been interviewed by AI for a job. 0345 6060 973. Ado is in Solihull. Ado, what would you like to say?
Yeah, hi, James.
Hello.
Lovely to talk to you. Well, I'd like to say anything really on AI.
Just whatever you cleared with the producer.
Sure. Well, in terms of degree, I came as a refugee in this country without privilege in my own country. And I think you can create privilege by doing a degree, because British universities are one of the best in the world even today. Even if it doesn't benefit you immediately, there's a new term called neuroplasticity, which, tells us that your brain waves actually are changing with everything you learn new. So even if it doesn't benefit you now, immediately with a job, it will benefit you down the road.
And, I mean, that is the traditional view. How old are you, if you don't mind me asking?
I am 52.
I knew it. You're exactly my age, you see. And I don't think it's true anymore.
We have a lot in common, Kidderminster, one of the things.
Are you serious?
Yeah, obviously.
Magical.
Used to live 7 years there, yeah.
Whereabouts?
Just around Haberley Road.
Are you joking?
Yeah.
That's incredible. We used to live in the farmhouse on the hill up to the golf course. The Haberley Farm. That's a tiny little world. There it is, right there. And I think for our age group, we can see more of that neuroplasticity, or of the cultural exposure, and of making friends and seeing things. I don't think a 22-year-old or a 23-year-old would think that they were getting that in the way that we think we did. I really don't.
Yeah, but in a way you can cure your trauma by going to studies, you can make new friends, you can get a new job, you can start a business. In terms of AI, there's a new vocabulary AI thing where you can create your own clone. So in terms of interviewing somebody, you can have a clone interview, even though you're not present. It can be you interviewing somebody.
This is incredible. And of course, you're the big advocate, and we needed to hear your voice, albeit that it's the same age as mine, because the education as an end in itself, not as a means to an end, is something that has been absent from the debate so far. The very simple idea that university equips you with things that are great for your life, not just or not even for your career. Ado, thank you. We'll compare more notes on Kidderminster next time you ring in. 12:53 is the time. Laura Bates, you'll be aware of as the architect, really, of the everyday sexism movement, which grew so exponentially it took her by surprise, and led to her giving up her career as an actress and focusing instead on the Everyday Sexism Project, which spawned a book, and the book in turn spawned a second career alongside the campaigning activism as an author. And her latest book is absolutely fascinating. It's a warning. It's why I asked you about AI, and it is a kind of alarm call, because if steps are not taken sooner rather... mate, it's just I can't believe I just called you mate. I hardly know you. It's some of the stuff in there. There's like robot brothels. So one of the reasons why the AI revolution is, in her case, in her argument, reinventing misogyny, is because of the sex trade and stuff like that. And then another bit of it, which I found even more alarming potentially, was the idea that the algorithms deployed by AI in recruitment processes would actually make it harder for women to get jobs. I think that's what we were talking about during this clip.
What does the discrimination look like in the jobs market? How do you identify it?
Okay, so there's a number of different ways that this can happen. It might be about who ads are targeted at. So, for example, you might remember that some years ago, Google was targeting ads for high-paying professional services roles to male users and for lower-paid roles to its female users. Or it might be about a company coming along and saying, we can help you. You've got 1,000 applicants for this role. We can help you whittle down that talent pool using our AI tool, which will look at their CVs and it will find the best people for you to interview. And you think, well, that sounds quite good. And they'll say, even better, we'll tailor it to your company. We will find the people that will be best suited to work with you. And the way it's going to do that, like many AIs, is it's going to ingest a huge amount of information and it's going to train itself on that, and then it's going to give you the most accurate matches it can find.
Matches with what you've already got.
Right, so there's the problem. Yeah. So they're going to look at people in the C-suite and they're going to go, okay, we're looking for white men for these roles. Yes. And then, of course, the people who are selling you that software will say, don't worry, we realise that could be a problem. We're just going to turn off gender and we'll turn off race. So it won't know, the programme won't know, so it's foolproof. And you think, great, that sounds pretty good. Except that the programme will find proxies. It'll find ways around that. So what it will then do is it'll start picking up on words like netball in a CV. It will recognise that those are probably women's CVs. Or it'll start picking up on the names of historically black colleges in the US, for example. Yes. It will find ways to discriminate unless it is built actively with it in mind that we should be thinking about ways to broaden the kind of talent pool for these companies.
So it's beyond institutional sexism then, because it's setting the agenda for generations that we might have hoped were going to be set free by technology.
Absolutely. And this is, there are so many different settings in which this is the case. And it's not just about women. This is about marginalised groups as well. It's about embedding racism in the kind of foundations of our brave new world. For example, there's a healthcare algorithm in the US that's designed to identify patients who need extra care, extra attention. But it was found that it downgraded those needs when looking at black patients. It reduced the number of black patients identified for extra care by more than half. And there are 200 million patients in the US already being affected in healthcare settings where these algorithms are in use.
How did that work? Forgive my ignorance.
They were using spending on those patients as a proxy for need. In other words, they were taking existing forms of discrimination and unintentionally re-embedding them.
So the algorithm will take everything that is bad and make it worse. It will not even make it worse. It will use it as a precedent and a justification for doing the bad things more.
Yes, and it will make it worse. So that's the other thing. People think that if it imbibes a huge amount of data, then it will spew out something that is the same back at us. What people don't understand is that this particular form of AI is often designed explicitly to exclude outliers.
And there it is. So if you've got a board that is currently 80% men or even 80% white men, and you've got an algorithm that is designed to recruit new people, the algorithm will almost inevitably end up trying to replicate what you've already got. So it's going to make it even harder for people who are not white men to get onto board. It's the kind of thing that gives Donald Trump nightmares. But what the AI will do is start the very slow creep towards equality and inclusion. It will start putting it into the reverse gear. So even though nowhere near enough progress has been made, that progress could actually be undone. It's fascinating, isn't it? It's an incredible book. It really is. And she's an incredible woman. Let me just be 100% sure that I get the title right, because there's a couple of things in a similar space, not on the issue of the AI revolution. It's called The New Age of Sexism, How the AI Revolution is Reinventing Misogyny. I'd recommend all Laura's books, but this one is, it feels like she's once again in front. She's always at great pains to point out that lots of other people work in the same space, but it's almost as if she's got in front of a tsunami that is about to overwhelm us and brought an early warning. That's it from me for another week. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on, catch up on Global Player, or indeed on the rather splendid LBC app, which lets you stay up to date on the top stories and opinions, puts your news categories in the order you want. You can pause and rewind live radio and listen to a range of podcasts. So download the official LBC app for free from your app store now. Tom Swarbrick will be with you at 4, but now it's time for Sheila Fogarty.
She's a true leader, Laura.
She is brilliant, isn't she?
Yeah, she's a real leader.
I completely agree. It's a great phrase.
Yeah, that's what she is. Thank you very much, James.
James O'Brien on LBC.